Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score. I'm Dan Schneier. That's Jacob Gibbs, and we are joined by a reoccurring guest, one of my favorite people in the world, Dave Richard. When I first joined this company, he was the first person to reach out to me, or I should say when I first moved over to fantasy. Either way, that's what nice people do. That's what great human beings do outside of the fantasy realm. And today, we are talking the toughest players to rank with Dave Richard. So I can't wait to hear these takes. Before we do that, though, I'm going to get in here and I'm going to say, let's put both of you on the spot, and then me after that. Start with you, Dave. Who is the most overdrafted player right now as we stand in late July before camp start in 2026 drafts?
So I gave you two names before the show, and then you guys were like, ooh, talk about Kyle Pitts. Talk about Kyle Pitts. So I don't know if Kyle Pitts is the most overdrafted player, but he's the one that I'm not drafting, and certainly I don't think is a top 5 fantasy tight end. We're coming off of a year where the splits are pretty telling for him. There were 12 games where he was playing with Drake London, and he averaged 9.6 PPR points per game on 6.2 targets per game. The targets were right on par with Bijan. The PPR points plus the half PPR and non-PPR points were on par with Brenton Strange. That's a replacement level tight end. Now, I can't say that that's the whole story and the final story with Kyle Pitts, but that has kind of been the story on Kyle Pitts is when he hasn't been the number one target getter in a given week, he underwhelms. He's underwhelmed us for years now. I don't see that necessarily changing. And just to put it out there, due diligence being what it is, 5 games without Drake London, he was a monster, 19 PPR points per game, 8.8 targets per game. But guys, you tell me, is Drake London healthy or not?
Fully healthy right now.
Yeah. So I know that everybody's getting super excited about Kevin Stefanski as the new Falcons head coach, and they think that means that tight ends are going to have a huge role in the offense, and it might, but I've always viewed Kyle Pitts as more of a receiver than a tight end. And it doesn't mean that I think some other tight end on the roster is going to start out producing Kyle Pitts, but I just think that Kyle Pitts is kind of what he is. And I don't think that Kevin Stefanski is going to be the one to turn him into a mega fantasy stud. I think he's good as far as tight ends go because he can get you around 10 PPR points per game. And there aren't a lot of dudes in the league that can do that. But I also don't think he's suddenly going to morph into somebody that's going to have 13 or 14 PPR points per game. You're not going to confuse him with the Lovelands and the Tyler Warrens of the world. And frankly, I'd rather take a chance on Tucker Kraft, assuming that he's well and good and ready to go for week 1 and practicing a lot this summer. Sam Laporta in Detroit. I know you guys have talked a lot about him. I'm a fan of his too.
Yep.
Harold Fannin. There are some people that just don't want to touch any Cleveland Browns. I get it. I didn't want to touch any Cleveland Browns either. I found myself starting Harold Fannin every single week last year.
Right.
So I think Fannin, and I think he's super talented. Todd Monken has a great track record with tight ends. It's just as good as Stefanski's. So I'm taking Fannin ahead of Kyle Pitts. So that's the player that I think is just kind of overvalued that we'll talk about right now.
So, Dave, let me ask you this. Does he fit in all the way down maybe at tight end 8 for you, or is it lower than that?
He's the gatekeeper to the late round tight ends. And I'm not saying that he is a late round tight end. You want to draft him. Where would I draft him? 7-8 turn.
Okay.
And it's a byproduct of all the other tight ends I'd rather have. And I forgot one other one that I'll still take ahead of him. And this might make you cringe a little bit, Dan.
Okay.
But Isaiah Likely, I think the role is going to be there. I think it's going to be there for him in New York. And I'd rather take the devil I don't know in Likely than the devil I do know in Kyle Pitts.
Well, I like that call a lot. We'll get into a little bit more Giants talk in a bit, Dave. But I will say this. I have him all the way down at tight end 8 as well. I don't know if you have 9 or 8. I think based on what you just said, 9 would likely ahead of him. But I feel like it's a tier break, and I might be willing to consider putting Likely into that tier, but he's the low bottom of that tier for me. I don't know exactly where Jacob's at with Pitts. We really haven't talked a lot of Kyle Pitts, but I really like the point you made about Stefanski not being the tight end whisperer that maybe he's made out to be, at least not in my opinion. For this type of tight end, maybe if it was a wide tight end, that might.
I think that's a fair point. Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to make. And there are some people that say, well, I mean, is there really a big difference between Fannin and Pitts? And some people might say that athletically, Pitts is far more gifted than Fannin, and I think I'd be hard pressed to disagree with you. But I don't think that's meant anything. And you look last year, just at the pure raw targets per game that Fannin was getting, it wasn't crazy, and it was still more than Pitts. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to flip on its head this year, and suddenly we're going to see Pitts getting closer to 7 targets per game with Drake London on the field, with Bijan Robinson on the field. And then we see a downswing for Harold Fannin. I like some of the receivers that the Browns added, but I don't think that they're going to be good enough to completely turn Harold Fannin into a nobody.
Yeah, you made a great point of it. I actually would even argue personally that Fannin is a better athlete than Pitts based on what we've seen. He didn't test better at the combine, but based on what actual tape shows, I think that's a better version of an athlete than Kyle Pitts personally. But I can see why you're out on Pitts. I will say this before we move to you, Jacob, and you give us your most overrated player. I had a lot of driving this past week, and I probably listened to like 14 hours of FFT. I caught up on all of it. So I do want to get on the joke real quick. Happy birthday, Dave. I have no idea when it actually is. You'll tell me at some point. But for those in the chat who keep shouting it out, happy birthday, Dave Richard. Jacob, give us your most overrated player in 2026.
Happy birthday, Dave. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here on Pitts because all we've really done is be negative.
Okay.
They did put out a great episode. I just listened to this on FFT recently where they did like devil's advocate, with a lot of different sleepers, breakout, bust candidates. So go check that out if you have not. So Kyle Pitts, I threw this up on the screen while you were talking. I do have him at tight end 8, by the way, but that's mostly just a product of me really liking the guys who are above him. Kyle Pitts is a year younger than Trey McBride, which is insane, and had nearly identical per route production in 2025. 1.79 yards per route run for McBride, 1.72 for Pitts, 9% first down per route run rate for McBride, 9.5% for Pitts. And of course, Drake London being out helped boost these numbers, but at the same time, I don't want to take that away from him. He produced well. He did produce very well last year. Another thing that I think is really interesting with Pitts that I don't ever hear people talk about him this way. Who do you think created more yards after contact in total last year on the receptions, yards after contact, Pitts or Harold Fannin Jr.?
It's Pitts.
How is that not yards after contact?
Yes.
That's not Fannin? Wow.
It's Pitts. Kyle Pitts was 7th in the NFL in yards after contact in total. Fannin was 10th among all players, not just tight ends. The only players with more than Pitts were Trey McBride, Jamar Chase, Jaxson Smith-Njigba, George Pickens, Khalil Shakir, and Puka Nacua. He averaged 2 yards after contact per reception. Fannin, the reason that you're thinking it would probably be him is the way he plays. He averaged 2.3, to be fair. Like, he did average more per reception. But this isn't anything new for Pitts either. I think he's gotten healthier and healthier and continued to like pile up these plays in a way that people maybe don't realize because they're not watching a lot of Atlanta. But the year before that, it was also really good. He actually had a higher per catch averaged 2.9 yards after contact per reception the year prior. Only Tucker Kraft had a higher rate among qualified tight ends in 2024. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think he actually is a pretty good player. If something were to happen in London, that we have seen what he can do. And then there's also the chance that in a different offense, he gets, more than we're accustomed to seeing as him being like the secondary part of the offense or whatever. But we just don't know,
Yeah.
Zachariah Branch could throw a wrench in this. We just don't know how it's going to go down. And there's a lot of other tight ends that we're feeling really good about. And I think have a lot of upside. Whereas I don't really know with this Atlanta offense, how high Pitts really flies. My player is Garrett Wilson.
Okay.
I had a hard time with this. My original choice is somebody we're actually going to talk about in this podcast. So I landed on Garrett Wilson. And mostly it's an opportunity cost thing. Wilson is obviously really good, but the only time we've like really seen him be like highly productive was last year at the beginning of the year when he had this absolutely insane target rate. Like his first read target rate, his overall target rate was like as high as Jaxson Smith-Njigba, which is like historically unprecedented what JSN did. That's basically where Garrett Wilson was at the beginning of the year. And that's almost definitely going to come down, I think, with them investing a lot in their offense. 2 first-round picks go to the pass-catching talent they've added there in New York. So I think people are excited about the quarterback change and are drafting Wilson because of that and because everybody knows that he's good. But again, it's about upside for me with this pick where it's just like there's so many players in this range that I would really, really like to take a swing on. And so I end up really kind of burying Wilson. I have a wide receiver 25 behind some of the players we're going to talk about today, Tetairoa McMillan being one of them. Behind Terry McLaurin, I know Dan's really excited about him. And then like Mike Evans, I think just has so much upside to create like big plays and touchdowns in this San Francisco offense. And I know that there's downside, but I also think there's downside for Wilson. Like if the Jets are just terrible, like we've seen time and time again, that it's not something that's really that meaningful for fantasy. It doesn't really matter how good he is. I've got a tough time with him, but I'm curious like where you land on him versus T-Max. I think people's minds are pretty similar, where it's like bad offensive environment, good player. Does one of them stand out, or are you just kind of fading both of them?
I'm give me the names one more time, Jacob. It's Wilson and who?
Tetairoa McMillan.
I'm fading McMillan more so than Garrett Wilson, and it's just purely. It's not necessarily talent based; it's environment based, and I'm starting to get the heebie-jeebies about the Panthers altogether. We talked this week about those last few games for Carolina, and I know it's Tetairoa as a rookie, and we can't judge him necessarily on that. But Jalen Coker was outperforming him, scored more touchdowns. Garrett Wilson was putting up huge numbers with Justin Fields. So I kind of can't help myself with Garrett Wilson that he'll be a top 20-ish type of fantasy wide receiver, and in full PPR with the target volume that I anticipate him getting, and with the upgrade at quarterback to Geno, I think he'll be okay.
For me, I'm fading both, though I have Garrett Wilson a little higher in my rankings at wide receiver 23. It's so fun to have done these last night, Jake, to actually reference them on our shows now. I think the two players that you have for him being 25 above me are probably Burden and McConkey, who I both have behind him. But
wow.
Yeah, Burden could have made this show for me. He's not going to, but I have him ranked much lower than consensus, I assume. I have him at wide receiver 28, so I assume that's lower than consensus. Certainly lower than the hype. Wilson, the fade for me is, are we sure Cade Klubnik isn't going to start some games this year?
Right.
Because Geno, A, has off-field concerns.
True.
B, the Jets may lose enough games and they have 2 first-round picks. They're pretty much playing for their future. And C, if that's the case, I'm out on the whole offense. Once Klubnik and Beck get in, I'm pretty much thinking these offenses are dead, with the exception of like a phenomenal playmaker like Love, because we saw that in 2018 with Barkley. He still was successful in his rookie year despite poor quarterback play and bad O-line play there from the Giants. So I'm out on the receivers in that regard more so. With McMillan, it's what Dave said. It's more so the environment. In addition to everything you mentioned, Dave, just think about this. The Panthers are likely to be without both their starting offensive tackles for week 1. It
scares me.
And we're already here in July, man. Look at what happened with the Chargers offense last year once they lost both their offensive tackles. Now, the Panthers have more depth. They drafted Monroe Freeling. That was legit. And even signing Rasheed Walker was a pretty great move, low-key move. But it still feels like, I don't love it.
Right. I don't want to count on Walker and Freeling playing above expectations, and then counting on the Panthers to come through. There's even a report today in Carolina that Jonathan Brooks has looked like his old self in camp. That's great. It still makes me nervous that this thing could bottom out quickly if they continue to have issues on the offensive line. They lost one of their edge rushers today. We don't know how long he'll be out. Kind of messy what's going on in Carolina right now, and it's scaring me off of everybody.
You got to help me get there, Dan, on why you're so low on Ladd McConkey, because I know you're excited about
so low on McConkey. I have him at wide receiver 24. Is that so low?
That seems
okay.
Yeah. That's 4 spots below consensus, which seems really surprising given that you're very high on the Chargers. I have him wide receiver 16. He averaged more points per game as a rookie than Garrett Wilson ever has in his career. And
this probably might help you get there. I'm wide receiver 31 on Quentin Johnston, which is above consensus, I assume, by a good amount.
Yeah, that's way, way, way above consensus. They have him wide receiver 46. I have him wide receiver 38, which is also above consensus. I don't think that the two are like mutually exclusive from having good years.
They're not.
So I don't know. That seems very low.
I think it's going to be a little more spread out though for me there. I mean, I just have guys you probably.
Why do you talk about Wilson and Ladd? Why do you prefer Wilson to Ladd?
Oh, that's a great question. Why do I prefer Wilson to Ladd? I think it's just I believe in the target share being better for Wilson and also the volume. I also just have a little bit of concern with Ladd just really never having done what we're hoping he'll do. I believe he can do it, but at Georgia, he wasn't this massive like yards accruer and this target accruer, and he really hasn't been that at any point in his NFL career yet. Great on a per target basis like Burden and some of these guys that people love. Just not there yet from a volume standpoint. I guess Wilson, you could argue, hasn't fully done that either yet, but more to a larger extent than McConkey.
Well, you've got that sliver from the 2024 season where Ladd finished so strong. I mean, almost 19 PPR points per game in his final 7, 9, including the playoffs. And he was actually over 20 PPR points per game if you include the playoff game. He was on a 153 target pace in those 8 games. That's his last 7 as a rookie plus the playoff game. And then this past year, the target volume wasn't there. The whole offense, you almost have to throw it out because it just wasn't the same type of situation in LA and what they want to be. I do love how he fits in with what Mike McDaniel wants to do there. I do believe that Mike McDaniel will bring out the best in this offense and the skill position players. The thing that does strike me, though, McDaniel's play pace has always traditionally been very slow.
Right.
And that I think that could burn us a little bit when it comes to pass attempts per game, just overall play volume. And if it's diminished just a little bit, then are we looking at Ladd McConkey getting north of 7 targets per game? And I think that's going to be tough to do on a regular basis. So I like him. I think he's a number 2 wide receiver in full PPR, but I don't think he should be shoved up there to where, some of these other wide, like he's not up there for me with DeVonta Smith, T. Higgins, Olave. Like he doesn't belong up there. He's a number 2 wide receiver for fantasy, and I'm okay drafting him accordingly.
I do think he could have some of the most efficient targets of any wide receiver.
Sure.
So I don't think
that's fine.
Needs to have a 27% target share. He, again, averaged more points than Wilson ever has as a rookie with a 23% target share. So, like, if he's there at anywhere between 20 and 25% and the offense is, like, anywhere close to as good as we think it could be, then I think most of the time that outcome is enough to outproduce Wilson and a lot of other guys.
Yeah.
And then what if the target share is 25% plus?
Sure. I get it.
Yeah, I have to consider if I'm too low on him. You've made a strong case, and I do really love the offense in him as a player, more so the first part of that. I just have guys ahead of him that, like, the 3 guys that are consistently ranked below him that I just won't move below him are Adams, Evans, and McLaurin. I'm going to be on my own island with those 3. I believe they're all mispriced currently going into draft season.
Totally fair. I'm so high on Evans, dude. Alrighty.
Yes.
We've got Dave and I. Let's hear Dan's. Dan tried twice to name his most overdrafted player, but there are actually 2 players we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So he's got his finger on the pulse. We got a lot of interesting players to talk about. We'll do that after our first break. But before we do that, who do you think is the 3rd most overdrafted player in fantasy, Dan?
So technically this is the 3rd most. Like,
this is going to be a shock.
Most.
This is going to be a shock to the audience.
No one's going to expect this one. I didn't expect it myself, but again, that's what the fun is. I spent literally 4.5 hours. It's long. It takes longer than you'd think, but every second of it I enjoyed, if that makes sense, which is crazy. I really enjoyed this, doing my rankings and my tiers last night, and I couldn't find a way for me at least, to move Jaxson Dart higher than QB 17. And that's behind guys like Kyler, Dak, Jared Goff, who I freaking love, Bo Nix, I think is weirdly underranked for reasons I'm not sure of, Patrick Mahomes, I'm taking over Dart, and Stafford, who I'm taking over Dart in a good scenario. So he's just above guys like Mayfield, Jones, Shuck, Love, Willis, Stroud. But he's in the tier with the better guys I mentioned first. But the problem for me with Dart, and why I have him all the way down QB 17, it starts with the number one thing. The rushing just is so unlikely to repeat itself, for not just because the Giants have already done things like in training camp practices, when he escapes the pocket, they blow the whistle and that play's immediately dead. They don't want him to scramble as much. And even if they haven't admitted that, they've essentially admitted by putting a drill like that in place. 2, the red zone rushing has almost no chance to repeat itself. That's a Brian Dable thing. And that's not a Matt Nagy thing. There were some rushing touchdowns from Mahomes, but it wasn't like zone read type stuff. QB bash they ran with Jaxson Dart last year. I see almost no scenario they're running QB bash again with Jaxson Dart this year. Even though it was effective play call, I just find it unlikely they're going to put him in these positions where he might get hurt. So if the rushing comes down, it was such a big factor in why he scored so much last year. I even saw a stat from you, Jacob. I'm trying to find in my head right now recently. I know he had the 5th most rushing yards per start. That was one stat of yours I remember, either 4th or 5th. And I think it was something with the fantasy points on scrambles that I can't fully remember now. I think it was like 0.98 points versus like the next highest was like 0.7.
What you're referencing is on plays where there was an avoided sack. So he had a very high avoided sack rate. It was one of the best. And then on plays where he avoided a sack, I looked at like, what did they actually do? I'll throw this up on the screen here. So here are the highest avoided sack per dropback rates in 2025. It's like Cam Ward at the very top. That's cool. But then when he avoided a sack, what happened? Not really anything. Partially, I think, because nobody's getting open on the Titans. Caleb Williams is another player who had a very high avoided sack rate. What happened when he avoided a sack? Most of the time, he threw the ball out of bounds. So like he didn't actually produce much for fantasy. Dart, though, comes in here with an avoided sack rate that's basically identical to Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen. And then when he avoided a sack,
he did a lot with it.
He averaged almost a full fantasy point per dropback on those plays. And the next highest was Josh Allen and Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes at 0.72, 0.71, 0.69. So Dart's way above everybody else. And on a bunch of these plays, if you actually watch all the Giants film last year, he avoids a sack, finds a guy down the field, and they freaking drop it. Like, that happens so much.
I put a whole cut up of that on Twitter a few months ago, so anyone can go check my profile and just search, and you'll see like it is a long cut up of like dozens of plays where should have been more. So that's the argument for Dart. But I think if they want him to play more within structure, it's just going to limit the ability to make those plays, specifically on the ground. And it seems like they want to play in structure. So that's one part of it. But the major part of this for sure is you listened to Giants Life last night. I watched their first episode. Everything they're preaching is we're going to be a physical team. We're going to get off the bus. We're going to run the ball. I just think it's a different mindset than that Brian Dable vertically oriented, intermediate vertical shots, read the field low to high to low. We'll see if I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think this is good for Jaxson Dart. I hope this is just all talk right now. But the reality is you bring in Patrick Ricard, you're going to be playing more 12 personnel with Likely and Theo Johnson on the field, some Chris Manhertz. I just think they're going to run the football a lot. I'm worried about Malik Neighbors and when he's going to get back. And I don't think the playmakers around him are that fantastic for putting up big touchdowns for Dart. I think he ran a little hot in the touchdown department last year and even hotter in the run department. And really looking at it, I just find those rushing stats hard to replicate this year.
But what if?
But what? No, this is a rank where like he's overdrafted, but at the same time, like when you draft him, you're trying to win your league. So it's it's fine.
You don't have him this low for like season long managed leagues, right? Like one quarterback managed leagues.
That's what I have him for. Yeah,
that's what he's saying, right?
That doesn't mean I would definitely draft all these players above him, right? Because in a season-long managed league where depending on the settings, depending on the format, there may be quarterbacks on the free agent market, then I can take a chance and go for upside with Dart over a guy like Stafford or even Mahomes or Goff to that extent and Prescott. But when it's not that scenario, I play in mostly super flex leagues, it's a different question altogether because most of the guys you're drafting are going to start, and I'm looking for different things. One of the players I drafted last year came onto at the end, Jared Goff, ended up being a big factor in the leagues I won. And it's not because he broke out to top 5. It's because he outproduced what the expectation was for him on a consistent basis.
Yeah. To my point, though, like for these single quarterback leagues, I think you have to have Dart higher than that because
that's fine.
Like,
I can put him like up there for 12 QB2. I still wouldn't have him above like Caleb Williams or Kyler
All
Murray.
Right. I think the 80th percentile outcome or better for Dart is better than all but like 3 or 4 quarterbacks. On paper, Dart looks almost identical to Jaden Daniels' rookie season, what he did last year on a per game basis, per dropback basis, all of it. I definitely understand anecdotally, like the story you tell here, it could come to fruition where the Giants offense looks completely different than last year. But at the same time, the Giants offense was freaking terrible last year, and he was doing this, and he actually was putting up good passing numbers and efficiency in a lot of ways too, with no receivers, with terrible offensive line play. I think it's entirely possible that like he's better as a passer and he could run, I don't know, 70, 80, 90% as much as he did last year or something like that. Like it's definitely in him. He wants to do that. And he probably will run and scramble a lot. I think the point Ryan Heath brought up about the history of Matt Nagy offenses not using quarterbacks around the goal line is really interesting. I don't know if you remember that, Dan, that like even Justin Fields had like by far career lows in terms of rushing around the goal line. So I do think that's relevant. Like if that comes to fruition, that's a huge problem for Dart. And that's more of like the, not in the 80th or better percentile outcome. But there's just this upside that he could be a complete game changer for fantasy at the quarterback position, which I just don't think you're getting very many of those quarterbacks.
And that's totally fair from an upside standpoint. He's higher. I would rank him higher than most of the guys I have, probably behind Caleb, I guess, at QB 11. Him or Kyler's close for me. I'm really high on Kyler this year. But yeah, I can see both sides of the argument. But ultimately for me, I feel like he's going to be a little overdrafted because there's just guys ahead of him that I think are going to have a better chance to have a good year.
Does it help you feel better about Dart knowing that 4 of the 9 touchdowns that he ran for last year were from 12 plus yards out? So red zone work, he's scrambling. This is what Jacob was talking about. And just instinctively, he takes off and runs his way into the end zone. And he only had 4 touchdowns total from 3 yards or closer. And
that's
I think
a lot though.
Yeah, right. So if we're cutting the rushing production to a significant degree, and even 30% is really significant, obviously he's going to need to do a lot as a thrower to make up for it.
Right.
And I don't know if I'm there yet on Jaxson Dart. So I get where you're coming from on it, but I do think he played great last year. I think he could be better. And if John Harbaugh learned nothing in Baltimore, then he's going to try and rein in Jaxson Dart. But he had Lamar Jackson, and he let Lamar be Lamar. They tried a little bit at times to try and coach him out of using his legs and leaning on his legs a little bit, but eventually Harbaugh had to throw his arms up in the air and say, you know what? He is what he is. Let's lean into it. And maybe he gets there eventually with Jaxson Dart, especially if Dart uses his legs to keep the Giants in a game. And to that end, their schedule to begin the year, Dan, I think you would look at it and you'd say it's great.
Yeah.
Maybe only 2 tough opponents in the first almost half of the season. So they're going to be in a bunch of games, and Dart's going to have to carry a big workload there. So I think he's a low-end number 1 QB, and I would draft him as such. But he's one of those quarterbacks that you're going to want to get a second quarterback with. Mm-hmm. So if you draft him, be prepared to draft 2, assuming that you're not in a small league and your waiver wire is just going to be filled with a bunch of good quarterbacks. And if that's the case, then you don't have to draft 2 because you can find a quarterback off the waiver wire.
Yeah.
Alrighty, good stuff. I think some really interesting conversations there. I do wonder if Dan is too close to the situation here, and some biases crept in, maybe with Dart or something.
The reverse bias.
I know. Well, that's exactly. Like, I remember last year though, like during the fantasy season, I know a lot has changed. You didn't know what the coaching staff was going to look like and everything. But last year you were like, I feel like Dart's so clearly like going to be the league winner next year, and people aren't going to really remember how good he was.
Yep.
And everything, and we're going to be able to get him like at kind of a discount when really should probably be like creeping up into that top 5 range. And I was like, I don't think so. He averaged so many fantasy points. I think he'll be probably top 5 or 6 quarterback like Drake May should have been last year.
Right.
And now
I know for you, he's your Drake May almost in a sense. And I'm not saying you're not nearly as convicted as you were on, and as we both were on May last year being a fantasy. But I know what your argument you're making.
I'm not making an argument.
No, or I know what you're hinting at to some extent, as far as what I was saying maybe last year. But again, that was before the coach. The coaching matters to me. Like, you give me Todd Monken here instead of Matt Nagy, and I feel a lot better about where I'm at with Jaxson Dart.
Of course. Yeah. No, I've got him at QB 11. I think it makes sense to be a little bit nervous about Dart. I'm lower than consensus, even though I realize there's upside. I've got Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence ahead of him, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert. I get it. I'm just saying, like, I think it's interesting that we actually can get him at sort of a discount because quarterbacks are pushed so far down the board now. And like, that's exactly what we want. And I get that it has changed since then, like the coaching and everything. There's plenty of reason to be nervous, but because quarterback is so deep, it just feels I'm so fine taking that risk wherever you can, depending on your draft, whether it's round 8, 9, 10, 11 or whatever. And like
just one more thing on that. I did at the time when I mentioned that also think Neighbors would be perfectly fine for week 1. And that's also an issue for me. I'm not feeling good about what I'm hearing there.
For sure. I think, and we'll take our break after this. The episode we just did where you and I talked to Jared Smola.
Yeah.
And then we did another like 2 hours where we looked at every single team and their schedule, I think is really interesting for a lot of different reasons. And the Giants are one of them, where you get a feel for how the schedule might play out. And it looks like it could be really ugly early in the season. And I think that they'll probably try to lean on the run game a little bit, especially if Neighbors isn't healthy, And so you might be able to get Dart pretty cheap at some point in the season, and their late season schedule is really nice. So if he's healthy in the second half, like, he could be one of the best buy lows at the quarterback position. It wouldn't surprise me that the second half he's like QB3 or something like that. Alrighty, we're going to take our first break. We're going to get back. We've got 10 players to talk about that we really do not know what to do with. We've spent all freaking spring and summer trying to figure out what to do with all these players. And these are the 10 that we've landed on as being like the hardest to rank. So hopefully we can figure something out. Maybe if you're here in the chat today, you can help us make up our mind on these players, because it's tough, but we'll do that at our first break.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
All right. Yep, go ahead, Jacob.
We've got 3 players from the chat, which I'm excited about.
Okay.
They've been asking us about these players a lot. I've just kind of like compiled the ones they've asked about the most. We've got 3 players from Dave Richard and 3 from myself. And then we also have 1 player that, so actually it's kind of 4 from me. This other player I just feel like we've got to talk about. And it's Jadarian Price. I want to start there. I hear so many different opinions on Price. Dan and I have talked about him a lot, and I feel like even you and I have just kind of fluctuated a lot. So I want to throw it to Dave first, because Dan and I, in that episode I just talked about, we felt like there's a real chance that, depending on the playing time, but if he gets opportunities early in the season, Price could really come onto the scene in a big way over the first month or 2. And if that happens, I think his perceived value is going to just like shoot through the roof. Okay. I'm curious if you're drafting much of Price, Dave. He falls into a kind of funny range outside of the top 24 running backs, where I think he has the most upside pretty clearly of that group.
So I'm looking for Price a little bit later, I think, than ADP. You can tell me where ADP is, but right around 75th overall. And it's because we don't know how big of a role he's going to have right away and when he might have a big role, because the answer to those questions, I mean, literally opposite ends of the spectrum. If he has just an okay training camp, he's going to split three ways.
Right.
They didn't bring in Emmanuel Wilson to look pretty on the sideline. He'll get some work. They know what George Holani can do, and he can contribute in certain situations. And that means that Jadarian Price, if you're putting him on your team, when are you starting him and feeling good about it? Maybe if somebody gets hurt, maybe if Seattle has a favorable matchup, we know they don't have that against the run week 1 against New England. That would not be the time that I would roll out Jadarian Price unless he has an amazing training camp and everybody just kind of looks around at each other and says, okay, this is the guy. He's the best running back that we have on the team. Let's put him out there and see what he can do. If that's the case, then I'm never getting him at 74, but I'm also not drafting him at 74. He'd probably be closer to 54 if I'm drafting him in that range. We also don't know when Zach Charbonnet is going to come back, and that's obviously going to be a huge factor at some point in the season. I would be shocked if a guy who tore his ACL in January is suddenly practicing and playing in July and is looking good doing so. And whenever Charbonnet comes back, I bet there's going to be multiple weeks before he ends up being anywhere close to his former self. And we know what role he's going to play, and that's a role that'll demolish Jadarian Price's fantasy outlook, because that short yardage goal line for Charbonnet, which I think he can still do even if his knee isn't 100%, and pass catching, playing passing downs, that's something that could hurt Jadarian Price as well. So I'm kind of taking a more cautious approach with him. I think talent-wise, he's good. He's a patient rusher. He follows his blocks. He's got impressive lateral agility. I think he can accelerate well. And I love the fact that he's got tons of tread on the tire because he was only playing about 30% of the snaps at Notre Dame. And I think he's a good pass catcher out of the backfield too. I just don't think we've seen a lot of that. But the range of outcomes is just so wide that I think it's smarter for fantasy managers to go in a different direction at running back than reaching for Price with even a top 70 pick.
Range of outcomes is super wide.
It's crazy.
It's
for
like,
now.
TreVeyon Henderson is sort of similar in my mind. He's somebody we're going to talk about today. I have TreVeyon ahead of him. Price, to me, is like almost kind of like Jonathan Brooks, who gets drafted way, way behind him in terms of range of outcomes. I think he's probably more, I don't even know if this is right. He's probably more likely to get opportunities than Brooks, but I also think that everything we hear out of Carolina is so positive. They really want to get Brooks the ball, is my guess, but they drafted Price in round 1. Where are you at with him, Dan? Like, I know you love David Montgomery. I assume you're taking him ahead of him. We talked about Ramondre Stevenson yesterday. Are you taking him ahead of him? Like, are you leaning towards those safety picks? It probably depends on team structure a little bit. How about him compared to like Henderson or RJ Harvey?
I have Montgomery ahead of him. I'd have him ahead of Henderson and RJ Harvey. Though, you know, a case can be made that he might be this year's Henderson and RJ Harvey, and that's not a good thing because that's somebody who right now where he's ranked, Jadarian Price, I would be very surprised if he's not ranked much higher by the time we roll to drafts in August, because he's going to get hyped in camp, and there's just no one who's going to give respect to Holani or Emmanuel Wilson. And drafters are going to start to get the idea in their head, which is fine, that this guy could be the lead back. And why am I taking guys like, I don't know, DeAndre Swift or ahead of him who might not be a lead back or might split it around, Breece Hall on a bad team, Bucky Irving, who knows what's going on. Like, when that starts to happen, Travis Etienne with Kamara back, when all Cam Scatterable and all that stuff starts to happen, that's when Price starts to get steamed up. So ultimately, I think I won't be in on him because of that. And I think a big thing that kind of turned me in this case, Jacob, was a case you made on either yesterday's episode or the one before we recorded. And it was looking at Zach Charbonnet as a player at the NFL level from a statistical standpoint, and recognizing that while he's not this most electric playmaker, he's really good at making the most out of nothing. And he's really one of the better running backs in the NFL, which I always thought he was coming out of UCLA. Is one of my favorite prospects at just taking nothing and turning it into something. Coaches love that. That's why he played a lot last year for the Seahawks, and he will be the red zone guy when he comes back, whenever that is. Good point by Dave. We don't really know when that is, but it seems like he's ahead of schedule. Who knows? I do love the point you made, though, Dave, that, and these are my favorite moments as an evaluator in fantasy football, when I could see something on tape that I disagree with the analytics on. And when it comes to Jadarian Price's receiving profile, I know the analytics say it's the worst thing we've ever seen, but the tape and what I see is a natural receiver and somebody who actually be a plus in that regard. And that's what I look for as an analyst, because I think that in many cases, I'm not a huge fan of analytics in general in fantasy football, but in many cases they can be good and they can help you and they prove right. We see some of the better breakouts from things like yards per route run and first down per route run, things like that. But when it comes to just that type of stuff, because the same case was made with Jonathan Taylor, like, oh my God, this is the worst receiving pro. When he's been given a chance to actually make plays in the pass game, he does at the NFL level. So that's the most extreme example of that. But yeah.
Alrighty. I do think there's a chance that there's a few insertion points in his schedule where they could get Price a lot of work and he could look really good. So week 2 is against the Cardinals, week 3 is against the Commanders, potentially that early. Then they have some, potential shootouts. I don't really know how it'll fare over the next month, but maybe. And then week 8, 9, and 10 before the week 11 bye, they have the Bears, the Cardinals, and the Raiders. So that's why I wanted to bring him up, is because I've been pretty low on him the whole time, but I don't really know what to do with him. I do think he clearly stands out from an upside perspective when you're looking at like running back 3s for fantasy. And then I looked at his schedule. I'm like, oh man, I could see him smashing here at the beginning of the season and just feeling really silly for not having any Price on my teams, which is kind of where I'm at right now. It kind of sounds like that's kind of where we're probably all going to be according to our current draft plans and where his ADP might end up and everything.
Seems like it. Yeah.
I don't know. How's that feel? It feels a little risky to me, but
it does feel risky. It feels like we might be missing out on something, but you could have said the same last year for those who didn't get RJ Harvey and Henderson in drafts, and that ended up working out really well for them.
That's true. The rookie prices are way down, though. I will say
they are. They're so down.
I think last year, like, really is playing an important factor into how this is shaking out with ADP, and then the fact that also people weren't that into this year's draft class. And so
I think it's also we haven't had camp yet. We're going to get 2-3 weeks of the BS going around on, here's the report. I mean, I'm seeing them already with Jonathan Brooks, and no one's actually watching it. We're just kind of hearing it, and then it just shoots them up.
Yeah, maybe. All right, let's talk about Dave's pick. We already hinted at it. TreVeyon Henderson is one of the toughest ones. So, Dave, why are you having a tough time with Henderson, and where have you landed?
Well, we know that when it comes to fantasy football, opportunity is more important than talent.
Yep.
And when you compare TreVeyon Henderson and Ramondre Stevenson, they're both very good backs, but TreVeyon Henderson has the talent to be one of the most explosive players in the National Football League. I truly believe that. I loved watching his film coming out. I loved watching his highlights from last year. I hated watching his lowlights from last year. And when I got to talking with some people who've been around Josh McDaniels, they all kind of said the same thing, which is TreVeyon Henderson didn't do enough of the little things right to earn a bigger role. And the Patriots really stuck with that. And so now the question is going to be, has he done enough this preseason? Has he learned those little things to take a bigger chunk away from Ramondre Stevenson? And on one hand, I want to say, yeah, of course he's going to, because he's this talented running back. But reality is that we just don't know yet. And we're at this time, not quite this time last year, but let's say 49 weeks ago, I was very excited walking out of Patriots joint practice with the Commanders because of what I saw from TreVeyon Henderson and Drake May, and I wrote stories on each of them. And you know which story ended up being prescient and which story ended up being dead ass wrong. And it's just a matter of, even if his training camp this year is great, are the Patriots going to give him the opportunity? And so I think you have to really guard yourself against that when it comes to drafting TreVeyon Henderson. And he's almost like a luxury pick. And you've got to really love your first 4 picks, maybe 5 picks, if you're going to take TreVeyon Henderson. And that's kind of where I'm coming out on him, because part of me wants to rush him up and say, he's too good. He's going to be too good. It's his second year. He's going to be better, but it's not reality. And we don't know if those opportunities are going to be there for him. And so it's better to just play it safe with him, kind of like what we're doing with Jadarian Price. We want to play it safe. And if we're wrong, somebody else is going to draft him and he goes off to the races. We're drafting him next year as a first-round pick. But I'm willing to take that chance because we don't know yet just how many opportunities he'll have in New England.
Yeah, Dan and I just had a bit of a back and forth on TreVeyon. He has Ramondre Stevenson ahead of him. How does that feel to you, Dave?
That feels totally gross. I want to go take a shower right now. That's how gross that is.
The thing
Sometimes
is,
you got to go out on a limb with these things and not just fall into consensus.
I know, but are you going out on a limb to go out on a limb, or are you going out on a limb because you really believe that things?
No, because I really believe it. We went over it on yesterday's episode. I don't need to go too much back into it, but all the advanced stats say Ramondre Stevenson was a better runner last year. All the actual stats say he was a considerably better pass protector. Jacob had an insane stat on that. And so to me, he's actually just a better player right now. From what I watched too, the film backed it up. Like one runner looked like he knew what he was doing, the other didn't. Now he could take a step forward and make that look really silly, obviously. But I just feel like he's the better back right now. And I think the Patriots agree with that based on what they did in the playoffs.
I think Ramondre is interesting. I think he's sort of like a cheaper version of DeAndre Swift, who I brought up. I think is a good target.
That's what he is.
That's nice.
I don't think his offense is as good.
Right.
But he played really well last year. I think he's always played well when he's been healthy. People think of Ramondre as like this banger, slow, bruising back or whatever, but he's honestly like been pretty dang good when he's been healthy and he's given explosive plays. Last year, I give this stat pretty much every podcast lately, but I do think it's so insane.
It is.
The percentage of his touches that resulted in an explosive play was running back one, tied with DeVonta. So he's not really the guy that people think of. And he can't.
Stevenson, not Henderson, by the way. Just
right. No, it's incredible that's tied to Ramondre Stevenson. I'm wondering, though, how much of it came in his last 3 games of the year? Because he was really in a great spot for those last 3 games.
Week 18 game against Miami where he had 131 yards rushing on 7 carries.
Well, I mean, I believe there was a game against the Raiders in there, too, where he had
RB7 and RB1 finishes in the last 2. So he did kind of pile it on at the end.
He averaged 27 PPR points per game in his last 3.
Yeah.
I think that's I think worth noting is that he did give us multiple looks at upside, which, is what people think of with TreVeyon.
Right.
But it just came like in the portion of the season that didn't really matter for fantasy.
Yep.
But TreVeyon had basically 3 big games, and then everything else was really low. He had 30 points, 32 points, and 28 points. And then he had one 17-point game, and then everything else was 12.6 or lower with a bunch of single-digit games. Whereas Ramondre had, 35 points, 27 points, and then plenty of these like 18, 16, 15, 17 games, and not quite as low of a floor, 21 in week 2. I do think it's a defensible take, Dan. I have a really hard time with it because it's the classic, like, what's in the box? TreVeyon Henderson.
Yeah.
If you have no TreVeyon Henderson, that's to me like way scarier than if you have no Jadarian Price.
Completely agree.
He could have a receiving profile. We've seen him be a 3-down back as a freaking 18-year-old at Ohio State, which we've never seen from Jadarian Price. His offense could be a lot better. He's tied to Drake May. Like I've got a really tough time with TreVeyon as somebody I'm going to have zero exposure to. That's basically where I'm at. And that's why he's so tough to rank, is because like on paper, we don't think that he warrants the draft capital where he goes. But at the same time, the upside case is so high that if you miss out on him, that's legitimately someone you're afraid to run into in fantasy on the other on your opponent's team. I remember I did a look ahead, like what would my rankings look like for next year? Last year, around week 14 or 15 or something like that. And I was like, I think TreVeyon's basically like a round 2 or 3 pick.
Yep.
Like
that's, you get him in round 5 or say whatever it is.
That upside is there. So I get it, Dan or Dave, that this makes sense as one of the toughest players to rank. Did you say where you actually have him among running backs? I've got him at 24, which is ahead of Montgomery, and that just feels dumb. Like it feels like Montgomery is almost definitely going to outscore him. I have Judkins ahead of him. And
I do too. I'm with you on all that. I've got him right at 24, so right on the line of the
only
number
a few
2, number
behind
3
you guys
fantasy running back.
How do you split hairs between him, Tootin, and Bucky Irving? I think that people view those 3 similarly.
I've got Bucky 23rd, TreVeyon 24th, and Tootin 25th. And
awesome.
by the time we get to a week into training camp, it could very easily be TreVeyon at the bottom of that list. And so these are all guys that we are hoping for the best. We don't know what we're going to get out of any of them. At least in the case of Bucky, not only did he have that great sample from his rookie year, but he started last year. He was more compiling than anything else because his efficiency wasn't that great. He was getting a lot of targets. He at least showed us that he can be a very good fantasy running back in those first few games. And then he got hurt. There were some other issues in play that kept him off the field. And he never really had the chance to come back to his old form. I don't want to bet on him coming back to his old form. I don't like Kenny Gainwell going to Tampa and being in the Rachaad White role.
Right.
That's why they got him. I don't like Sean Tucker potentially stealing goal line touchdowns. These are all things that I think could continue to happen in Tampa, which makes Bucky a trap back. But at least a trap back is better than a running back who is based, whose draft profile is based almost entirely on hopium. And I don't want to draft guys based on hopium. I'd rather draft guys based on what we know and what we've seen and what we think could happen this year. And just going back to those 3 words that we use for Price, range of outcomes. Would you be surprised if we had the exact same kind of year from TreVeyon that we just had last year? I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. And Ramondre, who wasn't great in his first 15 games, like those last 3 games really pushed up his numbers. I don't even know if he was a double-digit PPR points per game in his first 15. This is Ramondre I'm talking about. But he's going to take away enough work, certainly on passing downs, to put a big stop sign on TreVeyon Henderson being the breakout back in his second year under Josh McDaniels.
Makes sense. I think I'm going to move him up, though, to be honest. Like, the more I think about him and Tootin, I think I would rather just have him ahead of Tootin. I've been really surprised how low the Jags are in Vegas implied totals. I don't know if that means much to you, Dave, but we've been digging into it, and they're kind of middle.
What do they have him at?
The Jaguars, I think they're like 14th or something. And we looked with Jared Smollett, like fantasy environment score, and it's like the combined totals between the 2 teams. The Jaguars aren't that high. I could see the Jaguars starting out with like a 2-4 record or something like that. They've got some really tough teams, some tough defenses at the beginning of the year.
True.
And obviously everybody's talked a lot about like how lucky they got with turnovers and stuff. And if that changes and they just kind of come out on the bad end of variance early on, that would be, I think, scary for everybody and might cause some shakeups with how they maybe handle the backfield, or, for example, if they struggle to run the ball early in the season, or if they find themselves in bad game scripts, then maybe Tootin's playing from behind and stuff. I don't know. I think TreVeyon's like got the upside and he could play all 3 downs. And Ramondre, we've seen him, like he was really good last year, but he also gets banged up a lot. He's really physical. And also he's had some fumbling problems and stuff. Like there's a lot of paths to TreVeyon being a really, really good producer. It's tough.
I want to put that Jaguar schedule. This is their first 6 weeks. Just think about this as I name them. The Browns week 1. Okay, they're not going to be as tough as they were last year, but they're still going to be tough. Denver in Denver. I know Jacksonville played well in Denver last year. New England in week 3, Cincinnati in week 4. Cincinnati's defense is considerably better on paper than it was at this time last year. Philly in week 5, Houston in week 6. Where are the easy matchups for Jacksonville to begin the year?
Week 1-ish, maybe.
Makes me nervous about taking Tootin. So I already told you, but I agree that Tootin should be 3rd on that list with Bucky and TreVeyon.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I've been really high on Tootin because I do think the upside is so great there with Liam Cohen, who designs all this, fantasy friendly stuff for running backs. One of my favorite stats for the running backs is that back-to-back seasons now, Liam Cohen has had 2 running backs inside of the top 20 in expected fantasy points in the red zone specifically. So like both of those Bucks and Jaguars teams, he's had 2 guys. Tootin was there last year. I think that it's a really great setup for him to inherit a lot of that from Travis Etienne. But at the same time, like we just don't know how it's going to go. And me and Dan both are like big Chris Rodriguez believers. Chris Rodriguez freaking 2nd in the NFL among all running backs in success rate since entering the NFL, 2nd in yards after contact per rush, behind only Devon Achane, behind only Kyron Williams in success rate. It's like the Rams guys and Rodriguez and then everybody else in success rate since he's entered the league. And it's like, he's not playing in the Rams system. He's just a freaking dog. Like he just gets that. I don't know, man. It does scare me a little bit.
Did you like Rodriguez's film?
Yeah. I mean, he's not like he's kind of like Ramondre or something like that. I don't think he has as much explosive play ability. Right. He doesn't have as good a vision, but like he's very, very good at like running the man gap stuff and just getting what's there. He's really hard to tackle.
No, he's definitely hard to tackle.
And he was awesome in college too. Like his college stats are like the exact same. Like he just looks like a monster.
Right. And I'm sure that's what Cohen's going to lean on him for. And I think that familiarity is going to help Rodriguez get playing time. I can't get it out of my head that the Commanders had the chance to keep him dirt cheap and they said, nah.
It's odd. That whole situation is odd. Maybe there was something behind the scenes we don't know. It's hard to understand because you're right, because he was an RFA, if I'm not mistaken, which is like really, really easy to keep those types of players. But we'll take a break, and then we're going to get back into it with a player that I think from a talent standpoint, all 3 of us would probably say we rank him much higher than for a fantasy standpoint. So let's see where we're at with him and why it's so tough to rank him.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ hits every highlight from all the sports that matter to you.
JJ, we appreciate your time breaking it down.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With the plays you missed.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And analysis to give you an edge.
All we need is 20 points.
I was shaking in my boots.
Texas, Ohio State, who wins this game?
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, streaming free 24/7.
All right, Dave, let me hear your thoughts on Tetairoa McMillan, because I think right now he's probably the most highly contested fantasy discussion in the sphere right now. Where are you at with him? Are you drafting any of him, and what makes him so difficult to rank?
What makes him difficult to rank has nothing to do with him. I think he is such a freak as far as his athleticism goes, because he's so big and so rangy, huge catch radius, and man, can he change direction quickly. That agility is rare for a guy who's as big as Tetairoa McMillan is, but he didn't meet expectations as a rookie. He didn't have a ton of targets. It's 7.2 targets per game last year wasn't bad, but his catch rate was 57.4%. I'm really worried about Bryce Young. I don't know if he's going to end up ever meeting the moment of what number one overall NFL draft picks are. And you throw on all this recent news out of Carolina with their offensive line, it's only going to make things harder for them. I didn't like, and I already mentioned this, I didn't like how last year finished for McMillan, and that Jalen Coker manned the slot a little bit more toward the end of the year, and Coker scored more touchdowns. His metrics were better than Tetairoa McMillan's. Now they're talking about McMillan going into the slot. I think that makes sense. They should use him as a versatile weapon in the offense. But I don't know if he can ever achieve any more than 13.5 PPR points per game, given the environment he's in. I also don't love the change in play caller. I understand that Dave Canales wanted to remove himself from that process so that he could keep his eyes on the team a little bit more. We don't know a thing about Brad Idzik. I don't think he's called plays before. I don't know if he's even remotely good as a play caller, if he'll be able to get the plays even in fast enough to Bryce Young. I'm worried about this offense turning wonky and not being as effective. And even though their schedule isn't bad to begin the season, I don't see Tetairoa McMillan becoming hyper efficient on 7 targets per game. He's going to need in the neighborhood of 8.5 to 9.5 targets per game to make up for that. And I don't know if that's the Carolina way. And I don't know if Bryce can even find him often enough if he's throwing that much to him.
There just wasn't much of a rhythmic offense at all from a passing standpoint with Carolina at any point last year. In my mind, the closest we saw was that playoff game. And all these reasons are strong. I want to add one more on top of it. Are we really going to be sitting there in week 17 or 16 in the fantasy semifinals and 17 with matchups at Pittsburgh and cold, Steelers good defense, and then Seahawks, and being like, do we want to play Tetairoa McMillan, or are we going to play Jalen McMillan with like injuries to whatever it is, like those players who come up at the end of the year, and we're like, we're probably starting McMillan here because we don't trust. I just can already see this happening in my head, Dave, when it comes to this player. And that's kind of what happened a lot of the time last year with McMillan. At least that's how I felt like we were answering questions on Sunday and Thursday and Friday's mailbag. And a lot of them were around, do I bench McMillan? And a lot of times I answered yes, because on paper, it's a great player. And I really do like him. I think he's kind of the closest thing to Drake London that we have, even though he's not Drake London, but it's close. And from all the standpoint you said, from the movement skills, the ability, and I do like that we already heard Idzik say one thing about, you know what, we're going to try to get him out of that X role a little bit more this year and move him into a move Z role where he can actually like get into different positions so we can get him some manufactured targets. It all sounds good until you go watch a Carolina Panthers line without their 2 tackles and Bryce Young at quarterback. So it's going to be tough for me to get in on this one. Currently have him at wide receiver 29, which I know is way below consensus.
Wow. Yeah. My counterpoint would be that's not the right screen. My counterpoint would be that Tetairoa McMillan might just be elite. And if he is, that could matter. But this is a really thin argument. So it'd be, he's really as good as he looked last year. And real quick on the Jalen Coker stuff, Coker's great. And Coker did outscore him last year, but it's a very small sample size. And touchdowns had a lot to do with it. Coker got a lot of volume, but it didn't take away from McMillan. McMillan's first 3 target rate was basically identical to what it was before the Coker stuff. Coker was basically just kind of like taking a lot of ancillary pieces and putting them all into one player, which I think is good. I think having another threat in the offense is good. And so how does McMillan get to being worth the pick is that he's as good as he looks, and then the team passes more. And that's why I said it's thin, is we have no real reason to believe that's going to happen. We haven't really seen them do that. But it's possible that this is just like a prove it year for Bryce, and they're going to ask him to do more. And I think that could make sense and could coincide with where they're at, where they just paid Coker. He's clearly a big part of their future. Clearly, Tetairoa McMillan is a big part of the future, and they seem to really like Chris Brazzell and Xavier Leggett for what it's worth. And so they might feel like they have the pieces to like kind of soft launch this Bryce thing a little bit and get more from him. And if that happens, then all of a sudden it's just not this equation that we think it is, where it's like low volume, doesn't matter how good the player is. All of a sudden it might be
Right.
It does matter how good the player is, and there might be upside because the stats on McMillan are just crazy. So we've got this episode, if you want to check it out, it's 25 minutes on McMillan. But I want to show you this right here, please, somewhere in here. I can't find it, of course. Oh my gosh. McMillan last year, 32% of the team's first downs, which among rookie players, it tied Puka Nacua in his rookie season. Among rookie players dating back to 2000, nearly 2,000 seasons of rookie data, only Anquan Bolden as a rookie and Andre Johnson as a rookie have had better rates. So that's really absurd, of course. But I think even within that, you'll find kind of the bearish case on McMillan, which is like, look at those Andre Johnson seasons. He had, I think anybody who remembers Andre Johnson is going to be like, he's better than McMillan,
Mm-hmm.
He was the third overall pick. He was insanely good, just an absolute freaking monster. He had even better team shares than McMillan did. So McMillan had like all this volume last year, and Johnson was one of the few guys who had more. He had a 28% target share as a rookie. He had a 31% target share in his second season. Andre Johnson did, but he only averaged 14.3 PPR points per game. Because anybody who remembers the 2004 Texans or whatever, like I was only 10 years old, but Dave probably remembers that those
I was writing about them.
Yeah,
thanks for reminding me. Yes.
Happy birthday, Dave. Those teams probably weren't good enough to really get the production that we ultimately knew was in there for Andre Johnson. It took until year 5 for the true breakout from Andre Johnson, where he started averaging over 20, 21 points per game. And so that's why I think we're having a tough time with McMillan. But I do think if they do pass more, he could definitely still be worth the pick. I think he's actually one of the safest wide receiver picks that you can make. I'm curious what you think about that. Like outside of the top 12 picks, I'd be really surprised if he was like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have drafted McMillan. That was such a big mistake. Does anybody does that
I'm
resonate?
going to feel that way if I take him at wide receiver 13.
Yeah. I do think he's overdrafted.
I don't think he's got I think if you're drafting him toward the bottom of the wide receiver 2s, you're doing great. It's just a matter of whether or not you're drafting with Jacob, it sounds like. If you're drafting with somebody like Jacob who sees, you just can't ignore the metrics from last year, the talent that he has, hoping that Bryce Young can overcome, hoping that Carolina just as a whole can overcome all the concerns that we have, then yeah, I'm going to look pretty stupid saying that he's the 22nd wide receiver in my rankings. I think he's worthy of being a top 24 wide receiver, but I don't think he's like in that top 16, top 18. 18 makes sense to kind of pivot to because I just don't think he's going to be one of the elite receivers in fantasy, nor one of the top next tier high-end number 2 wide receivers. I'm a little worried about him getting there.
I have him at wide receiver 23 for what it's worth. So I'm being conservative with him in drafts. My point, though, about him being safe is that as I look at the guys above him, it's Terry McLaurin, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden, T. Higgins, Ladd McConkey, Jalen Waddle. Everyone there, I think, is significantly riskier, whether that's not certainty on their role or whether that's health-related reasons. Whereas McMillan, it just feels like he's so solid. Like he's a young guy. Like we know exactly who he is. We already saw him come in and do all the big boy wide receiver 1 stuff, Maybe his role expands, maybe it doesn't. We've already seen him be okay at this pick. He wouldn't be a huge loss. So that's my only thought on him is like he feels rock solid compared to a lot of these players that are risky. And there might be the upside case. It's probably not as likely to hit as somebody like Ladd McConkey or Emeka Egbuka or something like that, but it could hit. And so I kind of get it, but I don't have him ranked at wide receiver 15, which is where consensus has him.
It could hit, and I think he is way more upside than all these guys. So I think that's the fun of fantasy. The beauty is kind of in the eye of the beholder. I view risky in a totally different prism than you do. To me, like and I think most people are on your side, by the way, Jacob. I'm on my own boat with this. Like, to me, Adams and Evans aren't risky, and McMillan is, because with Adams and Evans, sure, it's age, it's injury, but I think that stuff's kind of BS, or not BS, but like not easily predictable. With McMillan, I can totally see a scenario where it's like a lot of these 4 for 50 games, because like that to me is the riskier part. The riskier part is like, do I trust Bryce to do anything different than we've already seen? Do I trust that passing game to do anything different than we've already seen? At least with Adams, Evans, who are considered risky, I know it's just simply, are they going to stay healthy? Because I don't actually think they're going to fall off. I mean, all these stats say that Evans was still one of the better separators, and same thing for Adams, actually. They were both 2 of the better route runners and separators in the NFL last year.
Let's talk about Luther Burden. So I've got him significantly ahead of T-Mac. I'm being very aggressive with Burden, which is basically how you have to be if you want to get Burden on your teams. Yeah. So where are you at with Burden, Dave? He's one of the 3 players you wanted to talk about today.
Rather have him than McMillan.
Yeah.
I think I loved his film, and I really focused only on the really the playoff film with Luther Burden. And the very first thing that stood out to me on Luther was the opportunities he had on crucial downs. 3rd and medium, 3rd and short, 4th and short. He's getting targets in playoff games. When you've got a veteran like DJ Moore, when you've got, an outstanding young tight end, Colson Loveland, Caleb Williams is finding Luther Burden. Luther also had a number of plays that were schemed up for him. I always look for that from wide receivers, even the studs. You want to have those layup targets where you're taking a step back at the snap, you're catching the ball, you've got teammates blocking for you, you make a man miss, and you gain yards after the catch. Burden can do that, and he did a lot of that. I didn't remember his arms being as long as they were when I went back and watched the film. And I can't help but think that even though the metrics don't necessarily show, great explosion from him, you can see it when you watch him play. And so this is a Chicago offense. When they jettisoned more, they opened up 85 targets from last year. I think the shakeout from the targets is going to change considerably, because I am a Colson Loveland believer, and I think Loveland's going to be potentially the top target getter on the team. I think he probably will be. But I don't think Burden is going to be that far behind. I don't need the coach speak from Ben Johnson. I already know just from how they used Burden late last year, talent that he has, that's enough to tell me that he's going to have a number of opportunities, including inside the 10. I think they're going to find ways to scheme him open inside the 10, and that'll open up a chance at maybe 2 touchdowns over the course of the year, 3 touchdowns on top of whatever he does from outside of the 10. So he's on my shopping list in that round 5 range. It's close between him and Tetairoa McMillan, but I like his situation a heck of a lot more.
I think the first point you brought up is really interesting about 3rd downs. I've got a stat here that's really specific, but it's wide receivers who converted 3rd down first read targets. So when the play was designed to go to them on 3rd downs,
right,
into yards and first downs at the highest rate relative to like expectation. And the guys here, I looked at this for Parker Washington purposes. I was curious if we might the theory.
Another reason why I like him. Yep.
The theory was like these guys overperformed in these type of opportunities, and that might be important to the coaching staff. So what might we expect in the next year? Maybe we'll get more and more of these opportunities. And Burden didn't have enough targets to qualify, but he did have a really good rate at plus 31% relative to expectations, which puts him like right around Parker Washington, George Pickens, DeVonta Smith as one of the most productive players. So that definitely shows up in the data, and it showed up in film. I'm glad that you brought up the film first, because so many people act like Luther Burden is getting ranked high just because he averaged a good yard per route run rate last year. And it's like, the case is about Luther Burden. Like, I mean, if you want to just sort by yards per route run and say he's Odell Beckham or whatever, sure. But like, the case is watch Luther Burden. He's really, really good. And he's in a really good offense potentially with one of the best play designers we've ever seen for fantasy purposes, especially. And I think the bringing up the inside the 10 stuff is also really interesting. I just had a discussion with Rich Rebar that'll go live on Friday. And what he brought up is that he thinks Odunze is the touchdown maker. He thinks that Loveland is the touchdown maker for this offense. And Burden didn't get very many targets in the end zone, and that he might be kind of a little bit underwhelming for players, or maybe more of like a PPR type of player, but not somebody who should be drafted so high in non-PPR formats. Maybe like a Zay Flowers kind of player has been over the past couple of years, where like his efficiency data is really good. He's clearly really good, but he's not getting a lot of touchdowns. And I said, well, we just maybe, but we don't really know, because I think last year he wasn't really the offense wasn't built around him really. They weren't intentional about getting him the ball
most of the year. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, DJ Moore led them in targets inside the 10.
Yeah. And my thought on him is why wouldn't he be used in that area? Because he's a freaking running back. He's a bull with the ball in his hands. He's so hard to tackle. And to me, he might not get a ton of end zone targets, but I do think that you'll see designed end arounds and stuff like that, some screens. They'll do stuff to get him the ball in scoring distance, because I think he's one of the best players in the league at getting 5 extra yards, And so if he gets a target at the 6-yard line, there's a good chance he might score, probably the best chance of anyone they have on the team. So especially if Odunze is not trustworthy in those contested catch situations again, then I could definitely see a lot of stuff being designed for Burden. I'm really curious where you're at, Dan, because I remember at the beginning of the offseason, we're it's going to be so interesting to see how this shakes out with Burden and Odunze. And it's been kind of what we predicted, which is that we thought Burden would probably be the one who gets pushed up a lot for hype-based reasons, whereas Odunze is kind of lagged behind. Where have you landed on the two Bears receivers now as we head into August?
I am so confused on this one. When with McMillan, I'm not really that worried if I'm out on McMillan and I don't draft him. I'm not concerned. I don't think too much can really go right. I mean, it can, but it's hard to imagine it going crazy. With Burden, it's well, if he does get this slot role, and I already kind of watched the tape, loved him coming out of Missouri, thought he was kind of underdrafted in the NFL based on 2 things. One, I guess just a incomplete profile, and 2, because Missouri stupidly just used him as a slot only. Now, I think what I saw last year was a player who's physical at the point of catch, much better vertical route winner than I think anyone realizes yet. And we saw that at times, the Dallas Cowboys long touchdown, a few other moments. But I think those long plays we saw at the end of the year to DJ Moore, I think those are Burdens now more so than those are Odunze's. And I really like, obviously, everything else you mentioned, which is Ben Johnson and everything of that regard. I want to rank him higher. I want to rank Odunze higher as well. And I want to rank Loveland higher. But one thing that concerns me, and I know Dave's into it this year, or at least if not, I'm pretty sure you didn't do it because we were working on so much draft stuff, but the strength of schedule. So I referenced a couple other strength of schedule stuffs here. And according to Sharp Football Analysis, the Bears have the 2nd hardest pass schedule. According to Justin Boone, who does a great job with the strength of schedule stuff as well over at Yahoo, the Bears have the 2nd hardest for QBs and the 4th hardest for wide receivers. I think ultimately this team might run the ball a lot again. And that's been my biggest concern throughout the offseason, even before I looked at the strength of schedule for this Bears offense and all the hype we're putting into it, and the Loveland and the Burden and the Odunze and even the Caleb to some extent. I still think this is a run-first team at heart. I still think they're at their best when they're running the ball, even though Caleb makes these spectacular, awesome plays. Rhythmically, he's not still the greatest, in-rhythm thrower, or he wasn't last year at least. And yet the run game, there were no real signs of stopping it at any point last year, no matter who they played. Even when they went into Philly in that Thursday or Friday game after Christmas, whatever it was, they ran all over Philly. No one had been doing that. So I just worry mostly about that when it comes to Burden, Odunze, Loveland. It's less so Burden specific, and it's more so, are we putting too much into this Bears passing attack for fantasy purposes?
We might be. The chat has basically said, a few people have said, they're really nervous about Caleb, and I think that's fair, right? And maybe we are a little early on this massive eruption for the Bears. They're still very young. We still have a lot of things we need Caleb to prove, really, in terms of believing that he's going to deliver this huge upside. I will say, I think Burden is probably the most insulated from everything you just brought up and from the Caleb struggles, because he's the best with the ball in his hands. And so I think he can kind of move around a matchup in the way that maybe Odunze might not be able to, just by being able to create and get short design stuff. Whereas Odunze, if Caleb struggles with the accuracy down the field again, or if they're, under pressure a lot, or if they're, having just tough cornerback matchups, I think all of that comes into play with Odunze more than Burden. And really this stat is insane, but it kind of speaks to that very effect, is that last year, Luther Burden led the Bears in receiving yards on throws that traveled 20 or more yards in the air past the line of scrimmage. He had 7 of those targets. Rome Odunze had 23 of those targets. DJ Moore had 22 of those targets, but they had fewer receiving yards on those targets than Luther did on 7 of those targets. And I think that my point being here that those targets to Odunze and Moore were wildly all over the place, unpredictable in terms of accuracy from Caleb. A lot of them were just thrown over the receiver because I think he sometimes chooses to just miss big on purpose, kind of. And I think, Burden is the one who I feel the safest about is him and Loveland. And then there's the upside, though, that if the offense does go nuts, if it is a lot better than even it was last year, and Caleb and all these guys take a step forward in year 200 Ben Johnson, that you've got the like insulated role, the catch and run stuff, and then the potential for a lot more. Like Dave said, like longer arms than expected, going to get the ball. I thought he made some really nice plays on the ball. I thought he did run some really good routes. Thought he did show improvement against zone coverage coming from college to the pros, where he like showed better feel for space and an ability to slow down and occupy the spots in zone where Caleb would be able to find him and stuff like that. So I do think there's this massive upside case, which is why I have him ranked where I do. But at the same time, I could definitely see it being not a waste of a pick, but not coming through in a huge way. If he doesn't get a lot of touchdowns and everything like that, then I don't know who's it. Like, is he better than, this is going to be so gross. Is he better than Wan'Dale Robinson? You know what I mean? Is he just that kind of a catch and run guy? Is he like better than Jaden Reed and Josh Downs and those guys?
Right. That type of mold of receiver.
If we don't get the upside case, and it's like, that's such an expensive price to pay for those guys.
It's true. But you're describing guys that are the Temu version of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And Amon-Ra St. Brown was made by Ben Johnson.
Right.
And I love Rome Odunze. He's a stellar human being. I kind of weirdly want to see what his foot looks like because he's complained about it so much, but he's not in that mold. Loveland is a great move tight end and a mismatch there. Burden is the one that could fit into that same type of mold that you're talking about, but not, I think he's got the potential to be not quite as good as ARSB, but better than those other guys that you talked about.
Odunze is one of the players who the chat has asked us about. I said we've got 3 players that the chat wants to know that they're having a tough time ranking.
Yep.
He didn't get asked about quite as much as the other ones. And also, I don't have a strong stance on him necessarily. I have him at wide receiver 28. I could see it being a big year for him if the offense overperforms, but I don't think I'll draft a lot of him. I think you might have a really hard time knowing when to start him. So maybe he's better as like a best ball player or something. But I think, and this is not going to be any surprise really, the questions that we got a lot of from the chat were about year 2 players. And so it's like Odunze, it's Lad McConkey. We've already talked about a little bit today. And then it's who I would have answered as the most overdrafted player right now. And that's Brian Thomas Jr. And so I've got BTJ really low. Really low.
How low is it?
Wide receiver 44. Here he is in my rankings.
Yeah, I get it.
I have 39, which felt low too.
Yeah.
Ugh, now I feel like a stooge for having him at 30.
Consensus has him at 32. So
you're closer to consensus, Dave.
Yeah, we're the crazy ones. So there's a lot of angles to take with BTJ. Obviously, the upside is there, but I think it's a very low probability of getting to that version of what he could be, what we've seen, which we've really never seen with Trevor Lawrence. But we've seen it, and we know that he can be something really special, especially if this offense is better than expected. But there's a number of different ways to quantify like why it might not be. One is simply that the Jags are kind of low in Vegas implied totals. That scares me a little bit. And part of that is that their schedule is really tough at the beginning, particularly the cornerback 1 matchups. It's about as tough as it gets for like 2 straight months to open the season. And so with BTJ, if you really believe in him, I think the best way to approach it is don't draft him and buy in on him. There's a sliver of a chance that he goes nuts still because he's so good that he's one of the few players that can just run by anybody, so it might not really matter who the cornerback is. But if he does struggle, I think you could probably buy him really cheap in the middle of the season. So stow that away if you don't want to pay the draft price for him, because especially as we get closer to the season, I think people will get more and more excited. The second thing is, I just think when the offense was working really well last year, it wasn't through BTJ.
Right.
And so I think we're probably going to see him, like what they've talked about him very positively this offseason. But specifically, what have they talked about? Just like deep ball stuff, right? Like have you heard anything where it's like BTJ has been way more reliable over the middle? We love what he can do. We think he's going to be able to run every route for us. I haven't heard anything like that.
I've heard that he's just more dialed in.
Yeah, that's great.
I've told this story on FFT before. So the Jaguars came down to Miami for a joint practice. And Liam Cohen on the record was like, yeah, it was nice to see Brian Thomas Jr. flash in practice for once. And he was making some big plays. skied high for a target in the end zone over a Dolphins defender, scored on the play. It really stood out to me. It made me wonder, well, where's his mind been? If he hasn't been, stepping up, did he need the bright lights of a joint practice for him to suddenly want to be involved and linked up with his teammates? And I learned over the course of this year that was a sign that Brian Thomas Jr. he didn't have his head in the right place.
Yeah.
And he was struggling. There were things off the field. The injuries certainly didn't help. And I don't want to give him a pass for last year entirely. And so I'm kind of coming out on, I don't think he's going to be as bad as he was last year, but I think so much has changed around him in Jacksonville that it's impossible to expect him to be as good as he was for that stretch with Mac Jones when he was getting 11 targets per game. It was crazy. He's not going to get the target volume that you're going to hope for, but I don't think he's going to completely suck like he did last year. And so what does that mean? Does that mean 11 PPR points per game, which means most weeks he's going to be around 8, and a few weeks he'll have smashes at 16,
right?
Something like that. Is that what that means? Well, that's a number 3 receiver. That's Jameson Williams. That might be what Alec Pierce ends up being. Might be what Marvin Harrison ends up being. But that's kind of where I'm kind of coming out on BTJ. And that's why I don't think anybody is taking him as a top 24 wide receiver. I don't think people should take him as the first Jaguars receiver off the board. But I think he does have a role in fantasy, expecting a mild bounce back this year.
I have got some context here from the Fantasy Points data suite that I think is really good. So in the rookie season, he was used very infrequently on like go routes. There were some of those balls, but with Mac Jones, when he was really producing well, it was a lot more like in breakers and stuff like that. And the expected fantasy point number was much, much better. Even last year, though, like you can see a split from the beginning of the season to the second half of the season when they added Jacoby Myers. So his go route was like 14% as a rookie. When Myers wasn't there in year 2, it was 21%. And then when Myers got there from that point on, it was 31% of his routes were goes. That's extremely high. It's 97th percentile according to their charting. And that is just, it's very tough to get a lot of targets when you're running that kind of, almost a third of your routes are go routes. Like it's just, you're going to have a really tough time getting targets. And then when you do look at the schedule and he's got all those cornerback ones, it's just like, I don't know. I could see him averaging 11 or 12, like you said, but it's like he averaged freaking 5 across the first 2 months. And then he averaged 16 across the back half of the season when he gets, Colts, you got Sauce Gardner, but could be a soft matchup overall. And then you have Ravens, Titans, Giants, Titans, Bears, Cowboys, and Commanders in week 16 and 17. I kind of like that. I could be talked into BTJ then, but early in the season, I really have a tough time with it.
It sounds like you want to pass on Jaguars on draft day and just double back for them buying low in October.
I think that makes some sense because people want to draft them, but nobody really knows how to. I do think Parker Washington makes sense as a pick because in the first half here, outside of this Browns game, I think that they'll probably be playing in a shootout or from behind a lot and against a lot of really tough outside corners. And so that feels like more of a setup where they're going to use more 3 receiver sets and hammer Washington from the slot. But yeah, outside of that, even like Tootin, I'm getting a little nervous about. I think you could just wait and see and then maybe get some of the pieces a little bit cheaper as the year goes on.
Facts. Love it.
Alrighty, what do we do with Marvin Harrison Jr.? Dave, I'm hoping you can help me here. We got Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson are the other 2 sicko picks that the chat wanted to hear about. I don't really know if me or Dan have. Dan has strong takes on Michael Wilson, but I think we're both just so scared of the Cardinals that we're kind of like, I'd rather not. Are you drafting Michael Wilson, Dan?
He's so lowly. Like his ADP is so low that I probably am because I just went through my rankings and had him. Let's see where I ended up putting Wilson. I had him at wide receiver 47, which I think is above consensus. Slightly maybe though, nothing crazy. It's troublesome because I love him as a player, but I have a lot of concerns about this Cardinals offense. It's not even just like the devastatingly bad early schedule and what that means. And it is a lot of just like, yeah, I don't want anyone on my roster once Beck is the starter there. I personally am very anti-Beck. I've made that clear on the show. I think he's a worse version of Mike Glennon. He's Mike Glennon without the arm, not capable to play at the NFL level. I don't think he'll even like play that many games. I think they'll have to like throw in Minshew out of like, just like they got to put somebody in who's competent. But even in that scenario, and even if that's not the case and Beck is better than I think, or Minshew's better than I think, it's still a LaFleur offense that's going to run a really slow pace. That's like the biggest issue I have with all this. Like, we're not even baking in how slow paced offense this is going to be. And maybe that's not the case if they're down 2 touchdowns early, but I'm worried about that. So it's a whole just team issue for me with these guys. Great talent, same with McBride, but it's just very hard for me to get in on drafting any of these Cardinals besides Love, who I have way above consensus, I think.
Where's Love?
Yeah. Love for me is RB 13, but in the tier, I do it by tiers. So that's like more important to me than the rankings. He's in the tier with the good players, and then it drops off to like the next tier. I just got him into tier 2.
Are you taking him in round 2, Dan?
So he's my 13th RB, and let's see how many receivers I would take over him. Probably not. Looking at it now, I think there's 11 receivers I'd take over him and 12 running backs. And maybe Bowers. It's close though. I'd be willing to consider him early to mid round 3. I just think if you look, I went over this on a recent podcast, but if you look at all the running backs drafted inside the top 10, there's like 8 of them. The worst finish by far was Ashton Genty last year, and that was still RB 13, and that was still also with the worst offensive line. The scenario for Love, I don't think can be worse than Genty's was last year. I could be wrong, but I don't think that.
No, I don't think it will be. You're saying who do you take between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson?
Yeah, the chat wants to know what we're doing with these guys, because obviously the splits are crazy where Michael Wilson looks like a complete afterthought in the games MHJ played, but I think that could have a lot to do with Drew Petzing and the way that he designs his offenses, and it could be a lot different this year. What we've heard from the new coach is like he has plans to use both of them. He's excited about the skill sets for both of them, and we've seen that Michael Wilson has a really interesting skill set, both in his ability to go get the ball and win to the catch point, and then also create after the catch.
Right.
Fantasy Points data charted him out really well in terms of win rate versus man coverage. Only DeVonta Adams and Jaxson Smith-Njigba had a higher route win rate against man coverage last year. So I think the talent is pretty clear. Both these guys are kind of low in rankings. People are sort of making the case for MHJ lately, but nobody really seems to want to draft Wilson that much. Even Dan and I are both lower than consensus, which surprised me a little bit, Dan. I thought you might be higher, but I get it with Arizona concerns. So I'm curious where you're at, Dave.
I'm going to let other people draft both these guys.
Yeah.
I'm going to draft McBride because I know that Mike LaFleur is coming from LA, and he's going to put somebody in Puka's role and somebody in DeVonta Adams' role, and he's got nobody for the Matthew Stafford role. But the guy who he does have playing quarterback, who's going to do his best to impersonate Matthew Stafford, has this insane track record of targeting tight ends. And I think his best weapon on offense from game to game is going to be Trey McBride. And I know it's a completely different offense, but last year it was their game plan almost seemed to be throw to McBride in the middle of the field and let him just beat people's butts on his way into the end zone for a touchdown. And that worked. And sometimes it worked in garbage time, and sometimes it worked in competitive games, but it worked all the time. And I think LaFleur isn't going to be able to get away from that. Whereas I agree with you. I kind of like the talent with Michael Wilson. I think there are elements that have been missing to his game that can be coached into him. We're never going to know until it's too late, certainly after the draft season, whether or not he learns to not stop when a play breaks down. You know, he runs his route. He's running his hitch route. Okay, he's ready to catch the ball, and he's just standing there. And he's not going in the direction of the quarterback. He's not trying to fight his way to become an available target. That's something that can be coached. And that's just one example that I noticed with Michael Wilson. And then when LaFleur talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. in the DeVonta Adams role, where did Marvin Harrison tend to play the most? Or I'm sorry, where did DeVonta tend to play the most? To me, that was the perimeter.
Right.
And I'm sure you guys have done this. His numbers along the perimeter, Marvin Harrison's, were terrible. He has not been able to win there. Now he's putting on muscle. Is he doing that for contested catch purposes? I asked that of Scott Turner former offensive coordinator. He was on the FFT show this week. He doesn't think that that's necessarily going to help Marvin Harrison Jr. I know that there's this amazing, everybody had a glowing scouting report, myself included, on Marvin Harrison Jr. Something wasn't clicking over the first 2 years, and it was regardless of who the quarterback was. And after saying all this, the number one thing that these receivers have to have, if they're going to replicate anything from LA, it's being on the same page as Jacoby Brissett. And is Brissett even going to be around for camp? He didn't do anything in the offseason. So I'm not excited about drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. or Michael Wilson at all. And while we might say, oh yeah, we can double back for Brian Thomas Jr. or Bashal Tutin during the season, dude, I think I'm going to let people draft those Cardinals wide receivers and let them sit and rot on their fantasy benches when they're not coming through this year. And you also mentioned the tough schedule. You guys go ahead and look at their schedule and let me know when it gets easy. I'm going to tell you when it gets easy.
It's insane how bad. They have the hardest schedule in football by far.
Their schedule eases up in 2028.
Yes.
That's when their schedule will ease up in Arizona.
We rolled through this on the show 2 days ago, Jacob and I. We go into a week 12 bye, and it's as like I see in the chat, people are like, you guys are speculating. They're going to fit. They have the talent to stay around 500. Okay, let's run through it one more time, and you tell us where we're wrong. Because week 1, Week 1, Chargers. No. Week 2, Seahawks. No. Week 3, San Fran. No. Maybe. I'll give you a maybe. Giants, maybe. Lions, no. Rams, no. Broncos, no. Maybe Cowboys.
Let me just stop you for a second.
Best.
So I think that's going to just play into how many games they win. How many of these games do they have multiple favorable matchups for every member, or not every, but for most of their offense? How many of these games is Jacoby Brissett going to average 8 yards per attempt in? And that might be asking too much. I might even have to say 6.5. You know what I mean? Like there's going to be games where they're going to get guard. It's going to be like last year, where it's either going to be a competitive game that's relatively high scoring, and that would be good to a degree. But I don't see a lot of matchups here that are good for these wide receivers.
Nothing is good for this.
I certainly don't see matchups that are good for the quarterback.
And the other thing is, like people are saying in the chat, and I respect it, like once they give Brissett a raise, if they give him a raise, and I think they will, they'll have incentive to play him. That's all good and well, but when you're 1-9 or 1-10 and you're heading toward the first, second, or third overall pick in the draft in a QB heavy draft, you're not going to not play your third round pick, Carson Beck, that you just drafted. The whole thing is you have to play him a little to be like, can we go into this next draft and like trade the pick or use it on the best non-quarterback? And does Beck show us something down the stretch that we want to believe in? They're not going to just not look for that for the sake of, oh, we have Brissett, but we're 1-10, but we paid him and he's making our offense look decent. Like that's just not how NFL teams work, regardless of how rational it is for your fantasy teams and how much better it is for Harrison, McBride, and Wilson. It's not how the NFL teams are going to operate. They have never done so in the past.
And now think about if this impasse with Brissett actually lasts longer. And it's the silliest thing to think about, that Jacoby Brissett is holding out or holding in or holding something. You know what he's not holding? A bag. And if then the Cardinals might realize that they're going to stink this year no matter what they do. So why should they overpay Jacoby Brissett? Man, it could make everything bad, even for McBride and Love, if it's not Brissett for the majority of the year. Jacoby Brissett needs to be in camp in Arizona pretty soon. And if he's not, then this could be a very ugly year for all parties involved. Keep an eye on it, everybody.
Yeah. Jacob, you're on mute.
I liked what you were saying. I was reading your lips.
Yeah, I think he double muted himself. He went back on mute. He's muted again.
He's still muted. It's just this little button of a microphone. All you have to do is click it one time.
There's clearly a mic issue here. I am curious what Jacob's follow-up is, because I'm getting a little heated myself with the chat here.
What's the chat saying? Are they loving?
The chat is saying some things that I deem to be nonsense in regards to the Cardinals competing and staying around 500 this year. I mean, if there's one team I can predict will be bad this year, to me, it's the Cardinals. It's not even based on them as much as the schedule that we just went over. I don't know where you guys are finding wins there.
The bigger issue is I'm going to want to start players against the Cardinals defense.
Right.
They kept Nick Rallis. I'm sorry that I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but does that mean they're keeping the same scheme as last year? And I'm not really sold on the defensive talent that they have. Goodness gracious. Those Chargers picks that everybody's making and is excited about, those people will feel like galaxy brains after week 1 when Justin Herbert has 3 touchdowns, Hampton has 2 touchdowns, Ladd scores, Kellen Winslow Sr. scores, Antonio Gates scores. You get what I'm saying? Like, this Cardinals defense is going to give up a lot, and you're going to want to have teams that play them. Seattle and LA play them twice during the fantasy season. Rams or the 49ers only do it once because week 18 they play home against Arizona.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello.
you're back.
My dog disconnected my mixer.
Sure.
What I was going to say about the Cards is the schedule does ease up, but it's not till week 15, which is after the week 14 bye, which is the most logical place for them to get the rookie quarterback in. 2 of those 3 games, it's Jets, Saints, Raiders, fantasy playoffs, are teams that are expected to play pretty freaking slow, and the Jets and the Raiders. And I think the Cardinals want to play that way as well, especially if they have Carson Beck in there. So even in the easy portion of their schedule, it could be really sloggy, gross games. The Saints being the one exception, but even the Saints could have a better defense than we realize.
Right.
So yeah, it seems like a pretty easy schedule to avoid, especially given the fact that it's the Arizona Cardinals.
Yep.
I want to talk about
Sorry
Saquon
for
Barkley.
exaggerating about the schedule, everybody.
I want to talk about Saquon Barkley. I want to talk about a good player on a team that actually we think could be pretty good. He's probably been the hardest player for me to rank for 3 years now.
Yeah.
I've got him at running back 12, which is much lower than consensus. So I've got Kenneth Walker ahead of him. I've got Derrick Henry ahead of him. And then DeVonta and Chase Brown are sort of similar in my minds, with more PPR upside there potentially. I think Achane is maybe the one that people would push back on, although he's ranked pretty highly in consensus. Amari Hampton is another one that people might push back on. I think Hampton is like, why would you take him? Like, his theoretical outcome is what we know we have with Saquon. You know what I mean? Like, he can be a workhorse who gives you explosive plays, who's in a pretty good offense with a good offensive line. And with the Chargers, it's just kind of like wish casting all of that stuff with Hampton. And you might have playing time concerns, I guess, if Keaton Mitchell takes a bigger role than expected. I think Keaton Mitchell's probably maxed out at 7, 8, 9, 10 touches or something like that per game. But Saquon, we know exactly who he is. And I think unless Tank Bigsby continues to push for more work or something, he's probably locked into the same role that we've seen from Saquon. Where have you landed on him, Dave Richard? Is he somebody you're taking like near round 1?
No, he's a round 2 pick. He's a top 10 running back. He's RB10 for me. I'm splitting the difference with where you have him. I like Brown better in full PPR. I like Achane better. Give me the second-year running backs ahead of Saquon. But I do have Saquon just a nudge ahead of Derrick Henry. I have him a little bit ahead of Kenneth Walker. And I do think he bounces back a little bit. Last year, he averaged almost 15 PPR points per game. It's not what we drafted him for. If you're taking him in round 2 and he's around 15 or 16 PPR points per game, I think he'll be pretty happy with that. And I think the very first thing that this Eagles offense did after they, kicked off Kevin Patullo from the team, they said, let's just get back to doing what we do best, and that's running the hell out of the football. And I think they tried to do that at points last year, and sometimes it worked out for Saquon and sometimes it didn't. Definitely everybody was too jaded over the 2,000-yard season. That's not coming back. That's not happening. Saquon's 29 years old. But I wonder if the new offense, which is a variant of what the Packers have been running, I wonder if that means certainly keeping things running back centric. Maybe even a slight uptick in targets for Saquon Barkley, which we don't normally talk about when running backs are paired with rushing quarterbacks, but maybe that happens. He already had 3.3 targets per game last year. That was higher than I think anybody necessarily expected. I think he's worth it in round 2. And I think if you take a receiver in round 1 and you end up with Saquon as your next pick and he's your RB1, I think he'll be good.
Dan, I know you're a little bit nervous about like Jeff Stoutland and stuff. I just listened to the ETR episode with Thorne, their offensive line guru, and he's like, obviously understands the importance of Stoutland, but he's like, I just feel like pretty good about the fact that all the guys that they have there are veterans and they're already going to do their own thing. He's like, I could see this being more detrimental, 2-3 years down the line, but like this year, I don't think that will have a huge impact on them. And so his thought, basically, he had the Eagles as the second best line. He said, if they're healthy, I think that they just have so much freaking talent on this line, and they've been coached up so well over the past, 5 years or whatever, that they'll get back to where they have been. He thinks that Sean Mannion, while we don't know exactly what it'll be, just given the coaching tree that he comes from, is that coaching tree has really helped provide a higher floor to offensive line play in a lot of different instances. And so, of course, we can't just say for sure that's what Mannion will do, but he felt pretty comfortable about that. I think it's possible that this is just too low for Saquon, man. I think he's sort of similar to like Jonathan Taylor, where I know JT had the massive year last year. I don't know if Saquon has quite as much juice as JT does right now. Like he's a little further in his career than Taylor. But at times over the last couple of years, these two have looked invincible. They've looked like just the best players on the planet.
Right.
And we know that there's a wide range of outcomes for their offenses. But at the top of that is like an offense that could be really, really, really good, you know, whether that's due to offensive line play a little bit more in Philly than Indy, but Indy does have good run blocking, or coaching. I think Indy has the edge there. But both of them, it's like this could be a really, really proficient run scheme with a really, really good player too. And so that's where I'm at with him. I brought up on the episode that we just did, which is a quicker one, a good one. I think if anybody wants to dig into like some of the blocking numbers from last year, but also what I brought up is I think he could be used in the red zone a little bit more, maybe with AJ Brown gone. I think there's some paths to upside for Saquon that don't necessarily just involve this crazy year where he's scoring 70-yard touchdowns every single play or whatever, in which case he would be a really good pick in round 2.
Yeah, we talked a lot of Saquon yesterday. I hear most of my thoughts there. You touched on a little bit of it. I feel very conflicted because all the strong case you made, I like Jacob, and then I have the other side of it, which is less so Statland and more so just like, does he fit Mannion's scheme? Is he going to be running outside zone? And in addition to that, like, do I trust Mannion and Hurts year one together? Like, is this offense going to still look gross? A lot of people have kind of already assumed it's going to look good in the fantasy sphere, and I'm not one of them.
I like that the chat's bringing up all the Goddard goal line shovel passes last year from Batulo.
Come down, yeah.
That was something that Rich Rebar brought up on that episode we just did too. And that could maybe go to Saquon, I guess, in theory. He had like about 40% of the total team touches in the red zone and inside the 10-yard line last year, which is a good rate. It's not quite up in the like Derrick Henry CMC range, but it's really good. I think this might be just too cheap for a player of his caliber, and that's why I wanted to bring him up. Let's talk about another Eagle, and that's Makai Lemon, who's very, very cheap. I think everybody's kind of come around on the DeVonta Smith upside case, which is pretty clear. I mean, the guy was one of the most ridiculously productive college players ever, was drafted as a top 10 receiver, and has been good all along the way, like career yard per route run rate, basically right around 2 yards, even with a clear alpha wide receiver on his team and in a kind of weird offense. With a lot of different play callers and everything, and sometimes questionable quarterback play. I'm really curious where you're at on Lemon, Dave, or on Smith too, if you want to give those takes, because I really liked him as a prospect. I thought he had a really fantasy friendly game, and I've got some like take shopping theories here from Matt Harmon I want to give to you. Okay. But first, I want to hear your thoughts on Lemon and Smith.
Smith, I have at wide receiver 15, round 3 pick. That's buying him pretty damn close to the ceiling. We've seen the track record of him blowing up without one of A.J. Brown or Dallas Goedert on the field. And as recently as the last 24 hours of when we're speaking, Nick Sirianni has talked about the extra opportunities that DeVonta Smith is going to get. I would be shocked if DeVonta Smith did not have a big year. So, yeah, I'm buying him close to his ceiling, but it's because I think he can hit it. Makai Lemon was my favorite receiver prospect in this draft. I am very scared to draft him anywhere close to what his ADP is. I've got him as a round 11 pick. There are a bunch of wide receivers, including multiple rookies, that I'm taking ahead of Makai Lemon. Although I love the fit in the offense, that's up here in my mind. I don't know if he's necessarily going to shine right away or even shine through the first 2/3 of this season, just because he's great against zone coverage and he knows where to find the soft spots. And, he was great after the catch in college. Man, his film was great. You said it, Jacob. He was very fantasy friendly, and he will be fantasy friendly. I think it takes time. And especially in the first year of this offense, when Jalen Hurts is learning it and he's got to get used to doing something a little bit differently than what he's been asked to do. And the fact that I think that there's still going to be a bastion of running, it makes me nervous to overcommit to Makai Lemon, even if that means a round 8 or a round 9 pick. And you think about players that you're taking in round 8 and round 9, you go, well, all right, if I miss on those guys, who cares? I think there are plenty of other players that have a better fantasy profile for the coming year than Lemon has in Philadelphia in his rookie year.
Yep.
Alrighty, I want to show you where I've got him ranked. But first, here's the Matt Harmon episode we did a week ago. It's Matt Harmon dunks on the data nerds, and I had to get his thoughts on DeVonta Smith because the 2024 charting from Harmon was insane on DeVonta Smith. It's like better than Jaxson Smith and Jigba's 25 charting. And so I was curious where he was at on DeVonta Smith after last year, which was kind of a gross year for Philly. And he actually still felt pretty bullish about Smith. Like, he did take a slight step backwards in his success rate versus man coverage, but he really liked his work for zone, which I think is really important for him potentially being wide receiver 1. But the theory from Matt is that if Jalen Hurts is at all uncomfortable in the under center world here that they expect him to be living in potentially here with the coaching change, that we might see more of these targets go quickly to Makai Lemon. If he feels any sort of pressure, if the timing based stuff doesn't work out very well with DeVonta Smith on those first read routes, that Lemon is the clear safety blanket, which does fit his skill set, I think, in theory, pretty cleanly, as like really, really good at the catch point, really, really good with the ball in his hands. So you can give him those 50-50 opportunities, and they actually turn into more like 60-40 opportunities, and he might be able to create a little bit on his own. And that feels a little bit better than like having to take the shot on the route developing with Smith and Hurts being able to deliver that throw over the middle or wherever it might be coming. Dan, when you talked about the offense and how you thought it might change with the new play caller, you brought up that you think they teach their quarterbacks in the system to go quickly from 1 to 2 was basically your thought. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, I listened to Sam Darnold to discuss it and how it revolutionized the way he thought about football. It's like read 1 to 2 to 3 very fast.
And so that also could mean more targets for Lemon. So I've got him at wide receiver 41. It's ahead of Wandale, which I expect you'll probably disagree with, Dan. I think there's more upside there, obviously, in this offense. Yeah, okay. I see them sort of similarly.
I'm more fine with the Lemon than I am the Smith, because Lemon you don't have to pay for. Smith you have to pay for.
Yeah. I've got him ahead of Michael Wilson and Brian Thomas Jr., who we've talked about today. I've got him ahead of Ricky Pearsall, who I really think there's a lot of upside with as well. And still I do come in a little bit lower than consensus, just 2 spots, but they have him apparently wide receiver 39. And this is about as high as I've been able to push him. So I don't know if I'll actually end up with him in drafts very much. This is why I wanted to bring him up to y'all. Is like, I think it makes sense in theory. There's a lot of different outcomes where he ends up pretty involved. But I don't know if he warrants like being pushed up into this range with Quentin Johnston, who you like a lot, and we think there's explosive upside with the Chargers. I really like, so this would maybe be the range that you could push him up into. Is like, I like Josh Downs and Jaden Reed's breakout case a lot more than Lemon. And I think most people disagree with that. So they're kind of similar players. But I think there's a lot more potential like target upside for Downs and a lot more potential yardage upside for Reed, who we've seen be literally wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per target since entering the NFL, ahead of Tyreek Hill, ahead of like everybody. I think those guys have a little bit more upside in their profile than Lemon does as a rookie. I'm curious where you're at, Dan. Like Dave said that he's coming a little bit below consensus. Is that basically where you're at too at this draft cost, right around wide receiver 40?
I have Lemon, looking it up now, as my, where is this name? I just was looking at it. Lower than consensus, looks like wide receiver 44 for me. But the first of a tier, so he drops. It's a bit of a tier drop off, and I'm still personally happier paying that price than I am the DeVonta Smith price. I think one of the biggest concerns for me is this: you ask a guy Jalen Hurts, who's played his whole career out of the gun, to go under center and operate out of this new thing. And it's a big discussion point last year. You know, Hurts didn't really want to do anything different. He wanted to do what he's comfortable. Now he's open to it. All right, I'm going to change. I'm going to try to do things different. That sounds great. I'm happy for the player. And obviously, like, what do you expect at this point? Like, he's feeling the heat. But, like, that doesn't mean he's going to be able to do it. We saw Caleb Williams transition to this after playing in the gun at Oklahoma and USC almost exclusively. And it was growing pains for Caleb Williams, just being under center in that Ben Johnson offense. It got better, but there were still a lot of moments last year where you and I, Jacob, were watching the tape of the Bears and we're like, he's missing a lot from a read standpoint. And that's Caleb Williams, someone with actual arm talent, like great elite arm talent, not Hurts, who can throw over the top and throws a good touch over the top outside the numbers, but has not really displayed any level of great arm talent over the middle of the field at any point in his career or dating back to Oklahoma or Alabama. So it's a big concern for me that he can run this offense the way people are expecting it to. But I'd much rather pay the price for Lemon at wide receiver 40 or whatever it may be than this high price for Smith, who I love as an actual player. And I agree with you. The Harmon charting is great because he is great. But unfortunately, in fantasy football, so is Tetairoa McMillan, but we're not drafting him that high. Like, you don't draft the talent, unfortunately. You have to draft the quarterback is really important to this whole thing. And I just, for you guys know where I'm at. I don't trust this quarterback, especially in a system he's never run before.
The last point I think that's relevant for Smith is the week 1 matchup looks awesome. That could be a shootout against the Commanders, and we could see a massive game for Smith or even Lemon. But after that, it's like Alante Taylor in week 2. Like there's a bunch of week 3 is a tough cornerback one. Week 4 has 2 good cornerbacks. Week 5 is a better matchup against the Jaguars, maybe. But then it's like week 6 is against the Panthers. They have 2 tough cornerbacks. The Cowboys' top cornerback is pretty good. Like week 11 is against the Steelers. There's a lot. I mean, they've got Sauce Gardner. They've got the Seahawks. They've got the Texans. Like there's a lot of really tough cornerback 1 matchups on this schedule.
How many of those matchups are against teams with stingy cornerbacks but weak run defenses?
The Colts.
Fair.
Giants. No, not stingy cornerback. They have bad run defense. They don't qualify.
The Bears.
Maybe.
Those are the only 2 that stand out to me.
Right. So those will be the matchups where I'm going to probably rank Saquon as a top 5 fantasy running back for the week.
Yeah.
And I'll definitely motor down on DeVonta. But I love the way he plays. I'm sure this is represented in, this is the film. He gets open and he's going to find ways to get open. It's not necessarily going to be 25 yards downfield. He has been and will continue to win on in-breaking routes. And that they're going to see a ton of zone coverage again. Defenses are not going to want to play man-to-man against Philadelphia. And
the more
so
that I think about it,
that means that he's going to get opportunities, Smith will, that maybe Lemon won't get. I see your point on where if Devontae's jammed at the line, timing's off. Okay, Hurts knows he's got to move on to the second read. Lemon, it would make sense if he's that guy, but he's got time in the bank with Goddard. Goddard's going to get a bunch of looks. They added a bunch of other veterans that might get some looks.
That's an excellent point you made about
they're going to teams
great
know
point.
this. I've talked about it with
everybody plays Hurts the same way.
And so when teams know, I talked about it with Joe Brady last year before he told me the worst thing that he could have told me for my sleeper of the year, but we're not getting into that. Teams anticipate what types of coverage they're going to get from most of their opponents.
Yeah.
And there are some teams that are like, we don't care who you got. We're going to play man coverage against you. Okay, fine. And then there's some teams, we don't care what you got. We're going to play cover 3.
Right.
But most teams are going to play Philadelphia, Buffalo, Baltimore, and the Commanders, whoever else is a running quarterback the same exact way. They're going to play with 2 high, and they're going to play zone, and they're going to make you dink and dunk. And DeVonta Smith can beat you any way you want. And that's one of the ways he can certainly do it is via dink and dunk. And that, by the way, will increase his target volume in those types of matchups. And so he could go out of those games with 8 targets, 6 catches, 100 yards. Maybe he scores. He's a must-start fantasy receiver. And we're living in a world right now where there aren't a lot of must-start fantasy wide receivers that we feel great about. We spent 20 minutes talking about all the problems we had with Garrett Wilson and then Tetairoa McMillan and Lamikaki. And those are the guys that are going to be going right after DeVonta Smith in drafts. Right. So there aren't a lot of wide receivers that we can look at and say, oh, yeah, slam dunk, easy start, no problem. There's going to be guys that we draft, and we might get to week 4, and we're going to be like, I don't know if I'm going to love starting these guys.
Yep.
We might be able to say that about Josh Allen's new wide receiver 1. Is anybody buying that? I've got
he's tough to rank, man. He is tough to rank.
He is. I agree with you, Dan.
I've got him at wide receiver 30, which is way lower than consensus.
Exactly where I have him. Wow.
That means I'm the high guy on more.
I didn't know that would be low.
Two guys on this show that I expected to be kind of low on, and I'm higher than you guys on.
I didn't know that would be considered low, wide receiver 30. I guess some people are just expecting he's like wide receiver 1 in Buffalo.
I think everybody's expecting that. It's as simple as that. I know that his Fantasy Pros ADP overall is 56.3. He's wide receiver 26. I've got him at wide receiver 25.
Okay.
And boy, oh boy, is he in that cauldron of wide receivers that have all kinds of glimmering potential, but we haven't seen them do well. Like there's flaws, there's warts to his game.
Right.
29 years old, efficiency dropping.
Yep.
On a team that doesn't necessarily, like, there's only been one time in the Josh Allen era when they've been featuring one wide receiver as a stud, and it took 9 targets a game for Stephon Diggs to be a massive fantasy superstar. And I don't know if they're going to do that with DJ Moore. There is a relationship between Joe Brady and DJ Moore. We've talked about it on FFT. Brady loves and trusts this guy. And I'm pretty positive that he's going to be more than willing to dial up a bunch of targets for him from week to week. I just don't know if they're all going to be of the downfield variety. And he might end up getting just way too many of the dink and dunk throws. And I don't know how good he's going to be after the catch on them because we haven't seen him play great after the catch. I mean, you tell me, how long has it been?
Really, since the Carolina days for me.
He had that pretty crazy year with Justin Fields.
I
think
that's fair.
People don't really remember how good he's been. I'll pull that up here in a second. I want to ask you about some of these specific player versus player situations here. Like, are you taking him or Jameson Williams, Dave?
Oh, I'm taking DJ Moore.
What about Odunze?
DJ Moore.
Christian Watson?
I can't help myself with Christian Watson. I'm sorry. I'm taking Christian Watson.
Dan, what about you on those 3?
So it was, let me see. It was Watson. I'm taking over him. Who else?
J-Mo and Rome Odunze.
Yeah, both I'm taking over him. I mean, I'm with you at our wide receiver 30, so those guys are clearly not outside of my top 30.
What about DJ Moore or Tetairoa McMillan, Dave? Did you have Moore ahead of him?
I've got McMillan a few spots ahead of DJ Moore. Put it in pencil.
You're low on Mike Evans. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, I'm low on Mike Evans.
We should talk about that because Dan and I are probably irresponsibly high on Evans. And so you have more
high.
You have more ahead of Evans, right?
I do have DJ Moore ahead of Mike Evans.
Talk to us on that. We got 2 new wide receiver ones, 2 potentially high-powered offenses. Both of them have maybe shown some signs of slowing down. DJ Moore and Evans, statistically, like it might look that way. Why are you higher on Moore than Evans?
I mean, at least there's fewer mouths to feed in Buffalo. If Kittle's healthy, if McCaffrey is still going to do his thing, it's not going to be 7 targets per game, but 5 targets per game. If Pearsall's healthy, does Mike Evans turn into DeVonta Adams, but on fewer targets? Is he 6 targets per game and he scores every other week? And we kind of got a version of that when he played last year, and I didn't love it. And I know that he's a great fit for this type of ultra precise West Coast offense because he can still cut. I'm not sure if he can cut the same way as he could 2 years ago, but I think that's a problem, that he's not quite the same guy. I'm worried about the target volume being there because there is a long history of 49ers wide receivers not getting a lot of targets under Kyle Shanahan. It's certainly an 8+. I'd have to look it up to see how many at 7+. It might be like 1. I worry about buying into the name and not what's grounded in reality, which is crowded situation on a team that, if they had its druthers, would run the ball a little bit more than throw the ball. And then on top of that, you've got all the injury concerns that Evans has.
How do you feel about that, Dan? I know, like, you and I have just felt like he's going to smash if healthy, basically. But are you concerned at all about like the target competition case there?
For sure. And it's a fair. The bus case is why he's not ranked as high for consensus and for Dave as he is for us. And it's fair. It's in addition to just like, what if he falls off from an age standpoint, injury standpoint? I guess my counter would just be, and it always is the same for me, but I just feel like touchdowns have become super underrated in fantasy. I looked at it last year. DeVonta Adams was the wide receiver 9 points per game fantasy scoring. He barely got any yards. He barely got, if you really look at these game logs,
so
I was
true.
looking at
You're right.
the other day, there were no yards in these game logs. It was touchdown after touchdown. And I just believe Evans will be one of these touchdown makers in 2026. And I want touchdown makers on my team. I feel like everyone underdrafts them because touchdowns are so hard to predict year over year. Everyone says they don't have correlation. I get that there is some luck involved in it. I'm not saying they're as correlated as yards per route run or first downs per route run. Of course they're not. And And that's why the rankings bear that out. But I do think that you can draft these good players on good teams and score a lot of touchdowns with them. It's why I'm super high on Derrick Henry as well. I'm way above consensus there too. And I'll always be there with Henry. Me and Dave talked about it. I feel like I've talked about Derrick Henry with you every August, Dave, for like 3 years in a row.
We say
every
the same
single
thing.
time it plays out the same way.
Yeah.
He's better than where he's drafted at. And I just feel like Evans will be that unless he gets injured. And if he gets injured, it's a bust pick for me. And I know he has a higher injury risk based on his age and injury history. I'm willing to accept that. I just personally am not a big injury predictor type guy. Some are, so I'm not one of them.
So two things. Number one, this is an apples to hubcaps comparison, but Juwan Jennings had 9 touchdowns last year,
right,
in 15 games, and he averaged 11.6 PPR points per game. So we could say, well, that's a target issue. He didn't get enough targets. Well, in the history of Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, I looked this up and I found it. 4 wide receivers, 4 in 9 seasons, had 7+ targets per game, and only 2 of those 4 averaged 15+ PPR points per game. All of them had at least 13 PPR points per game.
Interesting.
So if you want to go into drafts with Mike Evans at 13 PPR points per game, guess what? That's a number 2 wide receiver.
Yeah.
Have at it.
In today's world, that's still valuable.
That is still valuable.
In today's fantasy landscape, because passing is so down.
But all the other risks with him.
Yeah.
Hamstring that cost him 3 games last year. A broken collarbone and a concussion that cost him like 8 games last year. He had injuries the year before that. I love the guy. I've been rooting for Mike Evans. He's from the same hometown as my mom. So he went to the same high school as my mom. They're obviously generations apart. He's younger than me. My mom is obviously older than me. Too much about my mom here on the show. But I always root for Southern Houston kids. And he's one of them. And I'm still calling him a kid, even though he's 33 years old. But
Hall of Fame career.
Hall of Fame career, all that stuff. I'm not drafting the whole career of Mike Evans.
Right.
I'm drafting 33-year-old Mike Evans coming off of an injury-prone year on a new team and a new offense with a new quarterback that he's getting used to. Fair. I think the experience, him being in that offensive room, I think it's great. I worry deeply about him getting 7 targets per game, much less the 8.1 that DeVonta had last year.
It's a fair counter case, honestly. It's a very fair counter case, and it has me considering maybe moving him down a couple slots.
So DJ Moore, I've got 3 years data here, has averaged 13.6 PPR points over the past 3 years, which is more than Terry McLaurin, Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf, Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman Jr. On a per game basis. It's just below DeVonta Smith, Garrett Wilson, George Pickens, Chris Olave on a per game basis. We know Mike Evans has been even better than that, 15.6 points per game over the past 3 years for Evans. In terms of total points, DJ Moore is wide receiver 10 during that span. He's been very reliable in terms of being able to stay on the field and produce. I get why people are excited about the fit here with Josh Allen. I just don't know where he's at in his career, if he's as good as he was 3-4 years ago, if he's as good as he was last time he was with Joe Brady, if he's going to give us much upside in this offense necessarily, or if it's just going to be Josh Allen and James Cook in the red zone. And so it's relying on him getting long plays and touchdowns on his own. And I just don't know if I can expect that from him that much. I do feel like we can expect that from Mike Evans as long as he's healthy. I think there's a really good shot that he's going to be a touchdown creator in what I think will be one of the best offenses in the league. It's definitely fragile for all the reasons Dave mentioned, but you don't have to pay any sort of like exorbitant price tag to get him. You can get him as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. And if so, it's all upside in my opinion. And then the other thing I would say, we talked about this, we'll sign off with this because we're running up on a 2-hour podcast here. And I'm about to recommend another 2-hour podcast if you need it even more. This episode that we did with Jared Smola, where Dan and I went through all of the teams afterwards and looked at how their schedule might play out. I really do think it's good stuff for maybe breaking ties and thinking about how you want to, game it out, maybe see like portion by portion throughout the season. As I look at the 49ers, they've got the Rams in week 1, who have good cornerbacks. But as a Chiefs guy who's watched Trent McDuffie all along the way, he struggles against Mike Evans types. He struggles against bigger physical guys that he just can't do anything against. He's very fundamentally sound. He's a fantastic cornerback. But like in that sort of a matchup, I don't know how well he'll do. That could be a huge shootout. I could see a big game for Evans there. Then he gets the Dolphins and the Cardinals, And so I think there's a chance that we get 2-3 weeks into the season and you're looking at Mike Evans and it's like highest red zone target share in the NFL, averaging 18 PPR points per game. 49ers look great. He looks great. We know who this guy is and everything. Everybody's just crazy excited about Kyle Shanahan's ex receiver. And if you want to, then you can probably trade Mike Evans for way, way more than you drafted. That's of course speculative, but if you're like, he's guaranteed to get hurt, blah, 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 like you still could, in theory, take a shot on this and then trade him. If you think he's definitely going to get hurt, you could just trade him.
That's what I did with Adams last year. I know we discussed that a lot on the show. I made a trade I drafted Adams and traded him in a major league. Similar type idea, trade down the stretch these older players, but we'll see. I want to actually do one fun thing to wrap the show up, and no explanation. You can just give me the name answer, so it'll be quick. Who was the one player we discussed today that made you most reconsider where you have them ranked and you may go back right after the show's over and re-rank them? I think for me, that's DJ Moore. I think I'm going to move DJ Moore up.
For me, it's Jaxson Dart.
Okay. And
Moved him down. Well, you made a really great point, and I guess maybe I didn't even know about this, just how the Giants don't want him to run. Like the whole idea that they're blowing plays dead when he takes off and runs. And obviously they don't want him to get concussed near the goal line. If he's not scoring 9 touchdowns, I did the math while I was on the air.
Right.
If you take away all 9 of the touchdowns from his stat line last year, he averaged 15.5 fantasy points per game.
And he'll score some, but if you take away, I think it could be
right. So I think he might run his way to 5, and he's obviously going to throw more. But I think his upside is now really tied to Malik Neighbors.
Right.
And if Malik isn't himself until Thanksgiving, then Jaxson Dart's going to be kind of a dud.
I think it's TreVeyon for me. Like starting the show off by comparing him and Jadarian Price, I just felt better about TreVeyon, and I had them actually pretty similar in my mind coming into it, where they're just like, they're just a high, range of outcomes players, and I don't necessarily have that much more relative confidence in, TreVeyon than Price as players or whatever. But I think the more that I just think about the situation there, I could see it playing out in a few different ways where it works out for him, and I don't think he's that much different than some of the guys who have ranked ahead of him, like Bashal Tootin, like we talked about. So I think I probably need to move him up a little bit, but there was a lot to chew on today. Like I think I feel a little bit too low on both Saquon and Makai Lemon, like we talked about. I feel like I'm a little bit too low on Michael Wilson. I want to move him up too. It's just tough. There's a lot of players that I really like in that range for sure, but good stuff today for sure. A lot. I want
to read the comments. I can't wait to read the comments after the fact to hear which players, everybody watching changed their tune on.
Yeah.
And we did this last time I was on with you guys. I think that like we encouraged people to drop a comment and then we'd respond to them. And I know you guys are great at interacting with your audience. I tried to do it too sometimes. So I'll speak for the three of us. We'll be in those comments looking for your takes on who you changed your mind about. Dan, fantastic question to end the show, sir.
And great show. And thank you so much for joining us, Dave. Really love having you on. You've been on the show a bunch of times. You are the man. And for those of you who don't know, you can follow all of Dave's work over at CBS Sports. I hope you know that.com. There'll be a ton of written work coming in. We're starting the big stuff, the sleepers, the breakouts, the busts, all the things that you want to read from Dave Richard are coming to the site. Also, obviously, FFT. At this point, you guys are at least once a day. You have CBS Network show. There's so much content, the FFT and 10. So you get all the takes from there. Everyone else, please continue to help us support the show. We just got some numbers back and discussed them with our producers, and things are on the up for Beyond the Box Score and a lot of metrics that we've been tracking. But the way to get that better for us is by getting subscribers up. We're up to 4.02K subscribers, which is awesome. That's a rise from where we were at when I first started pleading for them, as the plug god will help me continue to plead and maybe help me plead a little bit less by getting those subscribers up without me asking. Hit the like button, leave comments always.
I know you're trying to wrap the show. What are you going to do when you get to 5,000 subscribers?
Good question. We haven't put anything. Well, we have time to go. So unless that happens today, Jacob and I will come up with something.
Come up with something cool to do, and you will get those subscribers. We did this
promise
back in the day for FFT.
I promise the listeners it won't be like an Adam Mazer thing where it's like, I'll shave a thing in my head if this happens and you don't get it. I'll follow through. That's perfect. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.